The night Rafael Serrano first saw Dr. Eleanor Vale, Baltimore was so cold that the harbor looked like it had forgotten how to move. A thin silver fog clung to the water, rolling between the old brick warehouses and broken dock gates, like a secret trying to find somewhere to hide. Most of the city had gone quiet by then. The tourist streets were empty, the good restaurants were locked, the shining offices downtown had turned their lights off one floor at a time. But near the neglected edge of the harbor, where the streets smelled of salt, diesel, rain, and old trouble, a single diner still glowed with a tired yellow light. It sat beside the water like it had been left behind by another century, its windows fogged from the heat inside, its red vinyl booths cracked at the corners, its coffee always too strong, and its door always open to people who had nowhere softer to go. That was where Nora walked in a little after midnight, wearing an oversized brown sweater, old jeans tucked into scuffed boots, and a wool coat that did almost nothing against the wind. Nobody looked twice at her. That was how she preferred it. To the few people still awake in that part of Baltimore, she was just a quiet, heavy woman with tired eyes and a doctor's bag she never let out of her reach. But if anyone had watched closely, they might have noticed the way she paused before entering, the way her eyes touched the windows, the parked cars, the back alley, the reflection in the glass. They might have noticed that she did not move like someone afraid. She moved like someone who had already survived the worst thing that could happen and had stopped asking the world to be gentle. 5 years earlier, the name Dr. Eleanor Vale had meant something in places far cleaner and brighter than that diner. People had spoken it in military hospitals, medical conferences, and private operating rooms with the kind of admiration that always came wrapped in envy. She had been one of the youngest trauma surgeons the Army had ever trusted with battlefield wounds, the kind of doctor who could keep her hands steady while alarms screamed, lights failed, and blood covered the floor. She had worked in dust, smoke, and heat. She had put soldiers back together when other people had already stepped away. Then she came home, thinking civilian medicine would be calmer. For a while, it was. She wore a white coat instead of field scrubs. She worked beneath polished lights. She learned the names of wealthy donors and shook the hands of men who smiled too warmly. Then she found the records. Missing patients, false deaths, private surgeries that never appeared on official charts. A hidden organ trade moving through the same hospital that sold itself to the city as a place of mercy. Nora reported it. She testified. She handed over copies of everything. And because the men above her had money, lawyers, friends in government, and no conscience worth naming, they survived by destroying her first. By the time they finished, Nora had no license, no reputation, no hospital, and no reason left to believe that the right thing would ever protect the person brave enough to do it. So she disappeared into the harbor district, where ruined things were common enough that nobody asked many questions. Above an abandoned bakery with painted-over windows and an old sign still promising fresh bread every morning, Nora built something the city would have shut down if it knew where to look. It was not beautiful. The floorboards creaked, the plumbing complained, the stairwell smelled of flour dust, rainwater, and old brick. But behind the locked upstairs door, there were clean sheets, metal shelves lined with supplies, a narrow operating table, a cabinet full of medicine she had acquired through favors, trades, and methods she never explained, and a battered lamp that could make a bleeding wound look honest. Every night, after the safer parts of Baltimore went to sleep, people came to her. A dock worker with a crushed hand, who could not miss work. A woman with a split lip, who begged Nora not to call the police. A teenage boy with a fever, whose mother was terrified of being asked for papers. A veteran, who shook too badly to sit in a hospital waiting room. Nora treated them all. She asked for what they could pay, and forgot the debt when they could not. She stitched, cleaned, set bones, dressed burns, and listened without pity. To most of them, she was simply Doc Vale, the woman in the loose sweaters who never smiled much, but never turned anyone away. They did not know that she kept a locked drawer full of old military commendations. They did not know she had once been called brilliant. They did not know she still trained in the back room before dawn, striking a hanging canvas bag with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood exactly how easy a body was to break. That night, she had closed the clinic later than usual. A fisherman had come in with a hook buried deep in his palm. Then a young mother had arrived with a child wheezing in the cold. Then one of her regular patients, an old man named Lewis who slept under the freight bridge, had shown up with frostbite beginning at the tips of his fingers. By the time Nora locked the clinic door, her shoulders ached, her eyes burned, and her stomach had been empty long enough that it had stopped complaining. She should have gone home to the small room she rented above a shuttered pawn shop. Instead, she crossed 3 blocks through the wind and stepped into the diner, because the owner, Mrs. Callahan, still poured coffee strong enough to keep the dead awake, and because sometimes Nora needed to sit somewhere that was not full of pain for exactly 10 minutes. She took her usual stool near the end of the counter, gave the teenage waitress a small nod, and ordered coffee and toast. Nothing sweet, nothing warm enough to feel like comfort, just enough to keep moving. Rafael Serrano sat in the private booth near the back, half hidden by the shadow of a broken neon sign outside the window. He had chosen the seat because it let him see the front door, the kitchen door, the emergency exit, and the reflection of the street behind him in the glass. Men like Raphael did not live long by trusting rooms. At 37, he controlled more of Baltimore's harbor than any public official would ever admit. Ships moved when he allowed them to move. Gambling houses stayed open because his people let them breathe. Union bosses answered his calls before they answered their own wives. Politicians smiled at him in private and condemned men like him in public, then took his money through people whose names never appeared on paper. He was not loud. He did not need to be. Raphael had the kind of stillness that made other men correct their posture without knowing why. His family had built its power through the docks, first with sweat, then fear, then strategy. His enemies called him ruthless, and they were not wrong. But even the people who hated him knew his rules. No children, no trafficking, no games with families who had nothing to do with the business, no civilian blood spilled to make a point. It was not mercy, not exactly. Raphael would have laughed at that word. It was control. It was order. It was the one line inside his dark world he refused to let anyone cross. He was waiting for a harbor official who was already 13 minutes late, and lateness always meant either fear or betrayal. Raphael had just begun deciding which one it was when the diner door opened again. Two men came in with the cold air behind them. They were not dressed like dock workers, but they wanted people to believe they were. Heavy jackets, cheap boots, hands too clean, eyes too busy. Nora noticed them before the bell over the door stopped shaking. So did Raphael. Mrs. Callahan was behind the counter wiping the same clean spot with a cloth, and the teenage waitress, Mia, was pouring coffee for a trucker who had not looked up from his plate. The first man walked to the register and smiled with too many teeth. The second stayed near the door. That was the one with the weapon under his jacket. Nora took one slow sip of coffee and set the cup down without making a sound. The first man told Mrs. Callahan that Mr. Boone was tired of waiting. His voice was soft, almost friendly, which made it worse. Mrs. Callahan's face went pale, but her hand kept moving with the cloth, as if cleaning could save her from what had just walked in. She said she had already paid what she could. The man leaned closer and told her old women should not make promises they could not keep. The trucker at the counter stared down at his eggs. The cook in the back stopped moving. Mia stepped forward without thinking. Only 17, and brave in the foolish way young people can be when they have not yet learned how fast cruelty can turn toward them. She told the men to leave Mrs. Callahan alone. The second man laughed. Then he grabbed Mia by the wrist and pulled her hard enough that the coffee pot slipped from her hand and shattered against the floor. Nora stood up. She did not rush. She did not shout. She did not reach into her bag. She simply turned from the counter and walked toward them with the same tired calm she used when approaching an open wound. The man holding Mia glanced at her and made the mistake most people made when they saw Nora. He saw softness and assumed weakness. He saw her size and assumed slowness. He saw the sweater, the tired face, the quiet mouth, and decided she was a woman who could be dismissed. Nora looked at his hand around the girl's wrist and said, very gently, to let her go. He smirked and asked what she planned to do if he did not. The answer came before the question finished settling in the air. Nora stepped close, caught his wrist against the edge of the counter, and turned his hand at an angle that made his whole body follow, because bone and nerve did not care how proud a man was. His face changed instantly. The smirk vanished. His knees bent. Nora shifted her weight, used the counter, his own pull, and the careless way he had planted his feet, and a sharp, ugly sound cracked through the diner as his shoulder slipped from where it belonged. He dropped with a breathless cry, hitting the floor hard enough to shake the napkin dispenser. Mia stumbled back, clutching her wrist. The second man reached for his jacket. Nora did not look worried. She looked almost sad, as if he had disappointed her by being predictable. She told him the gun was tucked too low on his right side, that his elbow lifted before his fingers moved, and that if he tried to draw it, she would strike the inside of his arm, numb the hand, take the weapon, and put him on the floor beside his friend, before he had time to understand the mistake. Her voice stayed mild, not cold, not cruel, just certain. That certainty did something to the room. Even Raphael, who had watched soldiers, smugglers, killers, and desperate men try to pretend they were not afraid, felt his attention sharpen. The second man froze. For one long moment, the only sound was the wind pressing against the diner windows and the small, frightened breathing of the girl behind the counter. Then the man backed away. He dragged his injured friend up with one arm, cursing under his breath, but not loudly enough to invite another lesson. They left the diner with less dignity than they had entered, the bell over the door trembling behind them, like it had seen something it did not understand. Nora turned to Mia first. She checked the girl's wrist with quick, gentle fingers, asked if she could move it, then told Mrs. Callahan to put ice on it and keep her off the heavy trays for the rest of the night. Mrs. Callahan tried to thank her. Nora only shook her head, placed money beside her untouched toast, picked up her bag, and walked out into the cold. She never noticed Raphael watching from the back booth. That was the part he could not stop thinking about. People noticed Raphael Serrano. They noticed him even when they pretended not to. They felt him in a room like weather. Men lowered their eyes. Women measured their words. Police officers forgot what they had come to ask. But Nora had moved through the diner, disarmed a violent man without a gun, faced another without blinking, checked a frightened girl's wrist, paid for coffee she had barely tasted, and left as if nothing important had happened. She had not looked toward his booth once. Not once. To Raphael, that felt almost impossible. He leaned back in the booth, his face unreadable, but behind his still eyes, something had opened. Interest was too small a word for it. Suspicion was closer, but not complete. He was fascinated by the contradiction of her, the worn boots and the battlefield hands, the soft body and the absolute control, the tired eyes and the calm violence. She was not one of his people. She was not one of his enemies. She was something else entirely, and Rafael Serrano did not like unknown things moving through his harbor. By morning, his most trusted lieutenant had a name: Dr. Eleanor Vale, former military trauma surgeon, disgraced, unlicensed, living quietly, running no official practice, no family nearby, no husband, no obvious protection. The report should have made her smaller in Raphael's mind, just another ruined professional hiding in a forgotten part of the city. Instead, each detail made her more dangerous. Disgraced doctors drank themselves into memory. They did not run toward trouble. They did not take apart armed men in diners. They did not carry medical bags through harbor fog after midnight. Raphael ordered a deeper search. By the next evening, he knew about the clinic above the dead bakery. He knew some of the people she treated. He knew no one in the neighborhood would speak against her. Even men who would sell their own cousins for $50 suddenly forgot how to talk when asked about Doc Vale. That, more than anything, told Raphael what she was, not hiding from the city, serving the part of it nobody else wanted to touch. He planned to approach her carefully. Raphael was not a man who apologized for gathering information, but he understood territory, and Nora's clinic was territory of a kind he had not seen before. No soldiers, no money counters, no guns at the door, only frightened people, wounded people, people who had already been pushed out of every clean, legal room in Baltimore. He told himself he wanted to know whether she could become useful. That was the word men like him used when they did not want to admit curiosity had become personal, useful. But before Raphael could decide how to step into Nora's world without breaking something, his own world split open. It happened on a cargo vessel, under a sky the color of wet iron. A false inspection came aboard with official jackets, polished badges, and the kind of confidence government men wore when they expected doors to open. Raphael sensed the wrongness too late. The boots were wrong, the spacing was wrong, the quiet was wrong. Then the pier behind them exploded into white fire, cutting off the exit, and the men with badges raised weapons no inspector should have carried. The first shot took one of Raphael's guards through the throat. The second shattered a floodlight. After that, the night became noise, smoke, rain, and movement. Raphael fought his way through the narrow passage beside the containers, his men falling back around him, his mind already reaching for the name behind the attack: Celeste Harrow. Elegant Celeste with her charity galas and perfect pearls. Celeste, who smiled beside mayors while buying private soldiers in countries most Americans could not find on a map. Celeste, who wanted the harbor and had finally decided Rafael Serrano was easier to remove than negotiate with. A bullet struck him beneath the ribs. For a moment he did not feel pain, only pressure, like a heavy hand had pressed into his body and refused to move. Then heat spread under his shirt. His breath shortened. One of his men tried to drag him toward the service ramp, but Raphael shoved him away and kept moving, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant handing Baltimore to Celeste. The pier burned behind him. Sirens wailed somewhere too far away to matter. His usual doctors were compromised. Hospitals would be watched. Every safe house near the water would be expected. Raphael pressed one hand against the wound and moved through a maintenance gate into the old service tunnels beneath the harbor, the ones built before anyone thought to map every inch of the city. He knew them from childhood stories, from smuggling routes, from his father's old warnings. The tunnels were dark, wet, and cold enough to steal the strength from his legs. Twice he fell against the wall. Once he nearly dropped to his knees and stayed there, but in the deepest part of his mind, one image kept pulling him forward: a woman in an oversized sweater, calm hands, a doctor's bag, a dead bakery with painted windows. Nora was washing blood from her wrists when the pounding came at the clinic door. She went still. The patients had gone. The volunteers had left. The old bakery below was dark. Nobody came at that hour, unless they were desperate, hunted, or both. She took the small pistol from the drawer beside the sink, moved to the door, and looked through the narrow security peephole. Rafael Serrano stood on the other side, one hand braced against the frame, his expensive coat soaked black with rain and blood, his face pale beneath the hard control he was using to remain upright. Their eyes met through the tiny circle of glass. Nora knew him. Of course she did. Everyone in the harbor knew Rafael Serrano, even people smart enough never to say his name too loudly. For one breath, she considered leaving the door closed. Then his knees buckled. Nora opened the door before he hit the floor. She caught part of his weight, cursed softly because he was far too heavy and far too armed, and dragged the most feared man in Baltimore across the threshold of her hidden clinic as his blood marked the floor behind them. Whatever had followed him through the harbor was now coming toward her too. She knew that. She felt it in the cold air, in the silence below the bakery, in the way Raphael's hand tried to reach for a weapon, even as his body failed him. Nora took the gun from his coat, then another from his ankle, then a knife from inside his sleeve, and only when she was sure he could not turn her clinic into a battlefield did she bend over him and press both hands against the wound. Raphael's eyes opened halfway. Even bleeding out, he tried to study her. Nora leaned close enough for him to hear her through the dark. She told him he was alive because she was a doctor, not because he was powerful, not because she feared him, and not because she owed him anything. Then she called him by his name, not with awe, not with respect, but with the blunt irritation of a woman whose clean floor he had just ruined. Raphael tried to speak, but the words broke apart in his throat. Nora did not wait for them. She pulled on gloves, locked the clinic door, and began preparing the operating table. Outside, the harbor wind pressed against the old bakery windows. Somewhere in the city, Celeste Harrow's people were already hunting for the wounded king of the docks. And inside a hidden room above a place that no longer sold bread, the only person standing between Raphael Serrano and death was the one woman in Baltimore who had never once trembled at the sight of him. Nora had operated in worse rooms before. She had worked under canvas roofs, while dust blew through open wounds. She had cut into men by the light of failing lamps while mortar fire shook the ground beneath her boots. She had held pressure on arteries with one hand and guided frightened medics with the other, speaking calmly, because panic was a luxury no dying person could afford. But none of those memories made it easy to stand over Raphael Serrano while the old bakery groaned in the winter wind, and his blood darkened the towels beneath him. He was not just another wounded man, no matter how hard she tried to make him one. He was a storm that had dragged itself to her door. A name that made people lower their voices, a man whose enemies would burn down whole streets just to reach him. And now he was on her operating table, pale, silent, and slipping away by the second, while Nora worked with a clamp, a needle, and the kind of focus that made the rest of the world disappear. She cut his shirt open and found the wound beneath his ribs, ugly and deep, still pushing blood with every weak beat of his heart. The bullet had done more than tear flesh. It had nicked something important, something that would have killed him before sunrise if he had gone anywhere else. Nora's hands moved faster. She gave him medication through a line she placed herself. She cleaned the wound, opened what she had to open, and found the bleeding vessel by instinct more than sight. Raphael stirred once, his hand jerking against the restraint she had fastened around his wrist after taking his weapons. Even half unconscious, he fought control. Nora leaned over him and told him, in a low voice, that if he moved again, she would let him bleed on principle. His eyes opened for a moment, dark, fevered, almost amused even through pain. Then they closed again, and for reasons she did not want to examine, Nora was relieved. The surgery lasted almost 3 hours. By the time she closed the wound, her back ached, her sweater was ruined, and the clock above the sink had become a blur. Raphael was alive, not safe, not healed, not forgiven by the world, but alive. Nora stood beside the table with his pistol within reach, and watched his chest rise and fall. She should have felt triumph. Instead, she felt the terrible weight of what she had done. Saving a man like Raphael did not end with stitches. It opened doors. It made debts. It called attention. She knew that better than anyone. 5 years earlier, she had tried to save people by telling the truth, and the truth had eaten her life whole. Now she had saved the most dangerous man in the harbor, and somewhere outside, the people who had tried to kill him were already wondering where his body had gone. Raphael woke near dawn. The clinic windows had gone grey with early light, and the city below was beginning to cough itself awake. He opened his eyes slowly, like a man returning from a place he did not trust. The first thing he saw was Nora, sitting beside the operating table with a mug of black coffee in one hand, and his gun resting on the metal tray beside her. She looked exhausted. Her hair had fallen loose from its knot. There was blood on her sleeve and a streak of it near her cheek. She did not look frightened. That bothered him more than the wound. Most people looked at Raphael and saw the violence around him before they saw the man. Nora looked at him as if he were a difficult patient who had ruined her night. She told him he owed her for the supplies. Raphael blinked once. Then, with a voice rough from medication and blood loss, he asked if that was her usual bedside manner. Nora said her usual patients did not arrive with enough weapons to start a small war. He glanced toward the tray and saw the careful collection she had taken from him. 2 pistols, a knife, a blade hidden in a sleeve, and a small tracker she had cut out of the lining of his coat and dropped into a glass of rubbing alcohol. For the first time since he had reached her door, Raphael's expression truly changed. Nora noticed. She told him his enemies were not stupid, and that if he wanted to die, he could have done it somewhere cheaper. He laughed then, barely, and the movement hurt him enough that his face tightened. Nora did not soften. She told him to stay still. She told him the bullet had damaged a major vessel, that she had repaired what she could, and that he needed real rest, antibiotics, and several days without trying to be impressive. Raphael watched her as she spoke. He was used to people choosing their words around him, polishing them smooth before they dared hand them over. Nora's words came plain and unpolished. She spoke to him like a man, not a legend. He found that more unsettling than the pain. Then he told her he would not leave her unprotected. Nora's face hardened before he finished the sentence. She stood, crossed her arms, and looked down at him as if he had just made the worst diagnosis of the night. Protection, she said, was not the same thing as occupation. Raphael told her Celeste Harrow would come once she learned who treated him. Nora said armed men around her clinic would terrify the very people she had built it for. Raphael said frightened patients were better than dead patients. Nora leaned closer and told him no one, not Celeste, not the city, and certainly not Raphael Serrano, got to decide what her clinic became. For a moment, something hot and dangerous moved between them. It was not romance yet, it was recognition. Two people who had survived by control, standing in the same room, each refusing to surrender the only world they had left. Raphael should have been angry. He was angry. But beneath it was something stranger, respect maybe, or the beginning of it. He looked at the woman who had dragged him from death, tied his hand to her table, taken his weapons, saved his life, and then demanded payment, like he was a dockhand with bad insurance. He had ruled men twice her size with a glance. Nora Vale looked at him and saw only a patient who needed to stop bleeding on her floor. He told her his men were already nearby. Her eyes went cold. She was about to answer when a soft chime came from the wall beside the medicine cabinet. Nora turned her head. The silent alarm had been triggered downstairs. Everything changed at once. Raphael tried to sit up, failed, and swore under his breath. Nora moved to the monitor near the old desk. The camera showed 3 people in city fire inspector jackets entering through the bakery's broken front door. Too early, too clean, too calm. One of them carried a respirator that did not match any fire inspection equipment Nora had ever seen. Another kept touching the side of his coat where a weapon would sit. Outside the rear exit, the camera flickered once and caught the small shine of a scope from the building across the alley. A sniper. Nora's fear did not rise like panic. It settled low and cold in her stomach, becoming useful. She unlocked a cabinet, pulled out a canvas emergency bag, and tossed Raphael one of his pistols with the magazine removed. He caught it and stared at her. She said she was not giving him bullets inside her clinic. He said that seemed unfair. She told him to save his strength for walking. Then she opened a floor panel beneath a storage shelf and revealed a narrow ladder leading down into darkness. The first shots broke through the door before they reached the ladder. Raphael rolled off the operating table with a sound that would have made a weaker man faint. Nora caught him before he collapsed, and together they moved toward the hidden entrance while glass shattered behind them. The clinic became smoke and noise. Raphael's men arrived from the street in a burst of gunfire, but Nora did not stay to watch. She had patients in the back rooms, 2 volunteers asleep after a long shift, and an old veteran who could not move quickly without help. She gathered them with the sharp calm of command. No one argued. Even Raphael, bleeding through fresh bandages, obeyed when she told him to put his weight on her shoulder and move. They descended beneath the bakery into the old storm drains, where the air was wet and bitter, and the tunnel walls sweated under their palms. Above them, the clinic burned with gunfire. Below, Nora led them through passages only the forgotten people of the harbor still knew. She had used them before to move patients when police raids came too close, or when violent men searched for women who had escaped them. Raphael understood then that her clinic was not just a room with medicine. It was a hidden system, a quiet resistance built under the feet of the city. And Nora, heavy-set, tired, disgraced Nora in the oversized sweater, moved through it like a general through a battlefield she had drawn herself. By the time they surfaced near an abandoned pump house, Raphael's men had secured a path out. He wanted to take Nora to one of his fortified homes. She refused until every patient and volunteer was accounted for, so he waited, pale and furious, one hand pressed to his wound, while she checked each person, wrapped blankets around shaking shoulders, and gave orders to men who had killed for less than her tone. None of Raphael's soldiers laughed, not one. They looked to Raphael, and Raphael, after a long second, gave a single nod. From that moment on, they followed Nora's instructions as if they had been waiting for them their entire lives. The safe house was not a house at all. It was an old maritime quarantine station on a narrow strip of land where 6 ships had once been held away from the city. Raphael had turned it into a fortress without changing its bones. The walls were thick stone, the windows were narrow, the water surrounded it on 3 sides, dark and restless. Nora hated it on sight. It looked too much like a place where powerful men kept secrets. But for the next several days, she stayed, because her people were hidden there too, because Raphael was still too injured to move without tearing open her work, and because Celeste Harrow had made it clear that hiding was no longer enough. During those days, the world between Nora and Raphael changed slowly. Then all at once, she changed his dressings. He watched her hands. She treated his wounded men with the same care she gave a frightened, undocumented woman and a half-frozen veteran. He expected judgment from her, but what he found was worse. She judged actions, not names. A young soldier with a gunshot wound received tenderness. A man who joked about scaring civilians received her cold silence until he looked ashamed. Raphael began to see that Nora's mercy had rules as strict as his violence. She did not excuse harm. She did not worship suffering. She simply believed that pain did not make a person disposable. Nora, in turn, saw pieces of Raphael she had not expected. He was brutal, yes. No gentle story could wash that clean, but his brutality had borders. When one of his men suggested using a rival's family to send a message, Raphael's voice became so quiet, the whole room seemed to shrink. He told the man that families were not currency, children were not warnings, and civilians were not tools. He did not say it like a saint, he said it like law. Nora watched from the doorway and felt something inside her shift against her will. Rafael Serrano was not good, but he was not careless evil either. In a city where respectable men had destroyed her life to protect a secret slaughterhouse, that difference mattered more than she wanted it to. Still, when Raphael told her she belonged under his protection, Nora nearly threw a roll of bandages at his head. She told him she belonged to herself. She said it so firmly that the room went quiet. Raphael stared at her for a long time. No one spoke to him that way. Not his captains. Not politicians. Not enemies unless they were already dying. But Nora did not look dramatic or afraid. She looked tired of men confusing concern with ownership. Raphael wanted to argue. Instead, he surprised them both by asking what protection would look like if she had the right to define it. Nora looked at him then as if she was seeing him take one careful step out of a very dark room. Before they could build anything steady from that fragile understanding, Celeste burned the clinic. The news came just before sunrise. The bakery was gone. The rooms above it had collapsed inward, swallowing the operating table, the medicine shelves, the old lamp, the files Nora had hidden badly on purpose, and the small cot where she had slept between patients. Celeste's people spread the story before the smoke cleared. Rafael Serrano had done it, they said. A punishment, a message. Several harbor workers were found dead nearby, staged like victims of his rage. Then another message came, this one only for Nora. Celeste had part of her old hospital file. Names, dates, enough to expose people Nora had treated in secret, enough to ruin the lives of patients who had trusted her because the legal world had already failed them. Nora did not cry when she saw the ashes. Raphael stood beside her, expecting grief, maybe rage. What he saw was something colder. Her face went still in the way it had in the diner before she broke a man's shoulder. She told Raphael that Celeste did not only want the harbor, she wanted applause. She wanted the city to know, even if only in whispers, that she had beaten Rafael Serrano. Pride like that was not armor, it was an opening. So Nora built the trap, not with force, not at first, with rumor, with timing, with the kind of quiet intelligence that had once uncovered a hospital's hidden crimes. Raphael's people spread word that he was fleeing Baltimore by water, wounded and weakened, with Nora and a stolen ledger containing evidence against Celeste. The ledger was real enough to be believable. Copies of it existed in more places than Celeste could reach. Nora made sure the bait looked desperate. An ambulance, a medical evacuation vessel, a storm rolling in from the coast, a refrigerated container terminal where cameras failed often enough that criminals trusted the shadows. Raphael hated the idea of Nora standing in the open, even as bait. Nora told him she was not bait. She was the surgeon. She was opening the wound. The storm arrived hard, slamming rain against the terminal lights until everything shone silver and black. Nora stood beside the ambulance in a dark coat, her medical bag in one hand, looking smaller than the violence gathering around her. Raphael waited high among the loading platforms, still healing, still dangerous, his men hidden in the maze of containers. When Celeste arrived, she came beautifully dressed beneath a long white coat, as if even murder required presentation. Around her moved mercenaries and corrupt officers with covered badges and hard eyes. Celeste smiled when she saw Nora alone. That smile was her first mistake. Once Celeste's people crossed the marked line, Nora triggered the lockdown. Steel barriers dropped with a sound like the city itself closing its jaws. Vehicles died. Communications went dark. Raphael's men appeared from above and between the containers, not rushing, not shouting, simply cutting off every exit with the discipline of people who had been waiting for permission. Celeste's face changed for only a second, but Nora saw it, pride cracking into fear. Then Celeste ran, not toward her trapped men, but after Nora. Nora led her into the old emergency treatment station beneath the terminal, where the lights flickered and the walls smelled of cold metal. Celeste followed with a pistol in her hand and rage in her eyes. She called Nora pathetic. She mocked her body, her ruined license, her illegal clinic, the idea that Raphael could want anything from her besides usefulness. Nora let every word pass. She had heard worse from hospital lawyers wearing kind smiles. She had heard worse from mirrors on nights when exhaustion made cruelty sound like truth. Celeste thought she was cutting Nora open. She did not understand that Nora had already learned how to survive being gutted by people with cleaner hands. When Celeste lunged, Nora moved. A rescue strap snapped around Celeste's wrist. A rolling surgical table shifted under her weight. Her own speed betrayed her. Nora used momentum, angle, and pain, the way other people used weapons. The pistol clattered across the floor. Celeste hit the table hard, gasping as Nora trapped her injured arm and leaned close with a syringe already in hand. Celeste, wild with disbelief, asked if Nora was going to kill her. Nora said no. Death was too private. Then she pushed the sedative in and held Celeste conscious just long enough to hear the truth. The whole room had been recorded. The ledger had already gone to journalists, investigators, and political enemies hungry enough to eat Celeste alive. Her confession, her threats, her attack, all of it was already outside her control. By dawn, Celeste Harrow's world was collapsing. Men who had smiled beside her at charity galas denied knowing her. Officers who had taken her money turned on each other. Her mercenaries vanished or surrendered. The harbor whispered, then roared. Raphael regained control of the docks, but something had changed in the story people told. They still feared him. They always would. But now, beneath that fear, another name moved through Baltimore, not as loudly, not with the same violence. Doc Vale, the woman who had saved the harbor king, trapped the harbor queen, and walked away with blood on her sweater and no need for applause. Months later, the bakery was rebuilt. Not polished, not pretty. Nora refused that. The new clinic still stood in the neglected district, but now its walls were stronger, its medicine shelves full, its escape routes cleaner, and its doors protected by men who had learned to keep their weapons hidden and their voices low. Raphael paid for everything, but Nora owned it. Legally, quietly, completely. She built more clinics after that, some in basements, some behind laundromats, some inside apartments where frightened people could enter through back doors and leave with bandages, medicine, and names of safe places to sleep. Raphael's organization protected the network, but it did not rule it. Everyone knew the difference, because Nora made sure they knew. One evening, long after Celeste's name had become a warning instead of a threat, Raphael found Nora on the roof of the rebuilt clinic. The harbor stretched below them, dark and glittering, full of ships, secrets, and restless water. Nora stood with her hands tucked into the pockets of her sweater, the wind pulling loose strands of hair across her face. Raphael came to stand beside her. He did not touch her at first. He had learned that love, with Nora, could not begin with taking. It had to begin with asking, so he asked if he could stay. Nora looked at him for a long time. The city below them was still broken in many places, so were they. Nothing about their story had turned either of them soft. Raphael was still dangerous. Nora was still stubborn, still illegal in the eyes of a system that had lost the right to judge her cleanly. But between them stood something neither had expected to find. Not rescue, not ownership, recognition. He had seen the surgeon inside the forgotten woman. She had seen the rules inside the feared man. And somehow, in the narrow space between mercy and violence, they had built a world that belonged to both of them. Nora told him her conditions again, not because he had forgotten, but because promises mattered more when repeated in peace. No trafficking, no civilians used as messages, no violence near her clinics, no decisions about her life, made without her consent. Raphael listened to every word, then he nodded, not like a king granting mercy, but like a man accepting law. He told her that she was the only person in Baltimore who could give him orders and live. Nora said she knew. For the first time that night, she smiled. Raphael reached for her hand slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. Their fingers linked in the cold, above the harbor that had tried to swallow them both. Far below, the clinic lights glowed warm against the dark street, and people who had nowhere else to go climbed the stairs to find help. Some came bleeding, some came afraid, some came carrying children, secrets, bruises, fevers, and names they could not safely speak. Nora would treat them. Raphael would guard the doors from the shadows. And Baltimore, cruel old Baltimore, learned to whisper a new kind of legend. They said Rafael Serrano ruled the harbor above the streets, where ships moved, money changed hands, and powerful men still thought fear was the strongest thing in the world. But beneath that harbor, in clinics and tunnels and safe rooms no map could ever fully hold, Nora Vale ruled something far harder to conquer. She ruled the place where broken people went when the world had called them disposable. She remained what she had always been, a fat white woman in oversized sweaters, an outlawed doctor, a protector with tired eyes and steady hands. He remained the man people feared. She became the woman he respected enough to obey. And in the end, the most dangerous thing in Baltimore was not his empire or her secrets, not the guns at the docks or the ledgers hidden in the walls. It was the quiet understanding between them, strong enough to change the rules of the city, and tender enough to make two ruined people feel, at last, seen. The storm over Greyhaven did not sound like weather. It sounded like the city itself was trying to warn Maribel to run before the harbor swallowed her whole. Rain beat against the rusted roof of the abandoned ferry terminal. Wind screamed through broken ticket windows. And far beyond the black water, the old lighthouse cut through the night with one slow, pale sweep of light. Mara sat on the cold floor with her late mother's medical satchel pressed against her chest, her nurse's shoes soaked through, her stomach empty, and her whole life packed into one torn canvas bag beside her. She was 29 years old, kind enough to hold the hands of dying strangers, stubborn enough to stand up to men who thought kindness was weakness, and fat enough for the world to decide she was easy to dismiss. That was the mistake people kept making with Mara. They saw her soft body before they saw her steady hands. They saw her worn coat before they saw the quiet fire behind her eyes. And by morning, the most feared man in Greyhaven would learn what everyone else had failed to understand. Mara Bell did not abandon bleeding people, even when saving them meant stepping into the dark mouth of a world she had spent her whole life avoiding. Only 3 days earlier, she had still belonged to St. Orlan's Hospital, or at least she had believed she did. She had walked those white hallways at night with a chart tucked under one arm and a cup of stale coffee cooling in her hand, checking pulses, changing dressings, whispering calm words to frightened patients who trusted her more than they trusted the doctors. Poor mothers asked for Mara by name. Old dock workers relaxed when they saw her broad, gentle face in the doorway. Children stopped crying when she sat beside them and counted their breaths. She had never needed a grand title to know she was good at her work. Her hands knew what to do. Her heart knew where to stay. But the hospital administrators never looked at her that way. To them, Mara was only the heavy night nurse from the bad side of Greyhaven, the woman with no wealthy family, no polished husband, no voice worth protecting. Dr. Cassian Meyer had been different, at least at first. Everyone treated him like a saint in a tailored coat. He smiled for charity photos, shook hands with city officials, and spoke softly to poor patients in a voice so smooth it almost sounded holy. Mara had watched him for months, trying to understand the unease that crawled up her spine whenever he touched a medication chart. Then one night, a man named Henry Vale died gasping for breath after receiving heart medicine that should have saved him. Mara checked the dosage. She checked the label. She checked the supply cabinet after everyone else went home. The pills looked right, but the smell was wrong, faintly bitter, with a chalky edge that made her stomach tighten. By dawn, she had found 3 more bottles with broken seals and false lot numbers. Counterfeit medicine, cheap poison dressed up as hope. Mara reported it the way her mother had taught her to report danger. Clearly, calmly, with evidence. She expected fear, maybe anger, maybe a quiet investigation. Instead, she was called into a glass office where 3 administrators sat across from her, as if she were the sickness in the room. Dr. Meyer stood by the window, his silver hair perfect, his expression wounded, as though Mara had hurt him by telling the truth. They said she was unstable. They said grief from losing patients could confuse a nurse. They said a woman in her position should be careful making accusations against a respected surgeon. By sunset, her badge was taken. By morning, every clinic in Greyhaven had heard she was reckless, difficult, and unsafe around medication. She was fired, blacklisted, and left standing in the rain with her mother's satchel in her hand, while the hospital doors closed behind her. The worst part was not losing the job. The worst part was Theo. Her nephew was 7, small for his age, clever in a bright, restless way, and cursed with lungs that tightened whenever the harbor fog rolled in too thick. Mara had been caring for him since her sister disappeared into her own troubles, and though Theo was staying with Mrs. Alvarez from the 2nd floor for a few nights, every hour apart from him felt like a small failure. She had promised him they would find a new place soon. She had promised his inhaler would not run out. She had promised, with a smile she did not feel, that grown-ups always figured things out. Now she had $7 in her coat pocket, nowhere to sleep, and a name ruined by a man who sold death to people too poor to question him. That was how she ended up in the abandoned ferry terminal, hidden between a rusted vending machine and a row of cracked wooden benches, listening to the storm throw itself against the harbor. The building smelled of wet rope, old salt, and dust. Ferry schedules from years ago still hung behind cloudy glass, their faded letters promising departures that would never come. Mara took out her mother's brass metronome and set it on the floor beside her bag. It was small, dented, and polished by years of use. Her mother had carried it from room to room during long shifts, using its steady tick to help scared patients breathe through pain. When Mara was little, she had fallen asleep to that sound, while her mother studied nursing books at the kitchen table. Tick, breathe in. Tick, breathe out. It was the closest thing Mara had to a home that still answered when she touched it. She was wrapping her coat tighter around herself when she heard shouting from the docks. At first, she thought it was the wind. Greyhaven storms had a way of bending sound until everything seemed alive and angry. Then came the sharp crash of a body hitting metal, followed by a low grunt of pain that made Mara go still. She rose slowly, every sensible part of her begging her to stay hidden, and moved toward the broken side door. Rain slapped her face as she peered out. Near the cargo rails, 3 men circled a 4th man in a dark coat. Their movements were fast, ugly, practiced. One held a short blade, another swung a metal pipe. The man in the dark coat fought like he had been born in violence and raised by it. He turned the first attacker's wrist with frightening ease, drove an elbow into the second man's throat, and sent the third stumbling backward into a stack of crates. In less than a minute, all 3 attackers were on the wet ground, groaning or silent. Mara should have stepped back. Any wise woman would have. But then the man in the dark coat grabbed the edge of a loading post and bent forward, just for a second. The lighthouse beam passed over him, and Mara saw his hand press hard against his ribs. Blood slipped between his fingers, dark and quick, washed thin by the rain. The man lifted his head. Even across the distance, Mara felt the force of his gaze. Dominic Vere, the harbor wolf. She had never met him, but everyone in Greyhaven knew the stories. Mothers lowered their voices when his name came up. Shopkeepers paid his men without complaint. Police cars drove slower near his docks. He was the man people blamed when bodies appeared in the tide, and thanked in whispers when worse criminals vanished from their streets. He stood in the rain like a nightmare, wearing an expensive coat, broad-shouldered, pale with pain, and far too calm for a man losing that much blood. "You should leave," he called, his voice rough but steady. Mara swallowed. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her satchel. "You're bleeding. That is not your problem. It is if you fall over before you finish threatening me." For a moment, even the storm seemed to pause. Dominic stared at her, as if no one had spoken to him that way in years. Then something like amusement passed through his tired eyes and disappeared. "You know who I am?" "Yes." "And you still came closer?" Mara looked at the blood again. "I'm a nurse." His mouth tightened, not quite a smile. "Then name your price." "I didn't ask for money." "Everyone asks for money." "Then everyone must be very disappointing." Dominic studied her through the rain. He was standing straight now, but Mara could see the strain in his jaw, the small tremor he was fighting in one hand. He was dangerous, yes. Maybe the most dangerous man she had ever seen, but he was also hurt, exhausted, and holding himself together with pride alone. Mara moved toward him before fear could change her mind. One of the men on the ground groaned, and Dominic's eyes flicked down with cold warning. The man went silent. "Sit," Mara said. Dominic looked at her. "Not because I'm ordering you," she added, her voice softer but firm. "Because if you keep standing, you're going to tear that cut wider." He should have laughed. He should have refused. Instead, the harbor wolf lowered himself onto a rain-slick crate with the slow, controlled movement of a man who hated needing anything from anyone. Mara opened her mother's satchel. Her supplies were pitiful compared to a hospital room, but her hands were steady. She cut away part of his shirt with small scissors, cleaned the wound as best she could, and pressed gauze against the deep slice near his ribs. His body tensed under her touch, hard as stone, but he did not flinch. "This needs stitches," she said. "Later. Soon." He watched her face while she worked. Not her coat, not her size, not the soft roundness she had spent years watching strangers judge before she even spoke. Her face, her hands, her eyes, it unsettled her more than the blood. "Why were you in there?" he asked. Mara kept her attention on the bandage, avoiding the rain. "That terminal has been closed for 6 years. Then nobody was using it. You have nowhere to go." It was not a question. Mara pulled the bandage tighter than she needed to. Dominic inhaled sharply. "Careful," he murmured. "Stop guessing things about me. I am usually right. Then enjoy the rare experience of being annoying and correct." This time he did smile, faint and brief, like a match struck in a dark room. It changed his face in a way Mara did not want to notice. Without the cold mask, he looked younger than the stories made him, though not gentle. Never gentle, just human enough to be dangerous in a different way. When she finished, he reached into his coat and pulled out a thick fold of money. "Come with me." Mara's heart kicked hard. "No. I need you to sit beside me until morning." That was not what she expected. The words were strange enough to make her forget the rain for a second. "What?" "Until morning," he repeated. "You will be paid well. I'm not that kind of company." His gaze sharpened. "I did not say you were." "Then what do you want?" For the first time, Dominic Vere looked away. His eyes moved toward the black harbor, toward the lighthouse beam cutting over the water again and again. Silence is difficult tonight. Mara heard something beneath the words. Not weakness. Not exactly. A wound older than the one under her hand. She thought of Theo sleeping on Mrs. Alvarez's old sofa, wheezing softly when the fog thickened. She thought of her mother's metronome ticking beside hospital beds, filling the space where fear liked to grow. She thought of Dr. Meyer smiling while poor patients died. "I'll check the wound once more," she said quietly. "Then I'm leaving." Dominic looked back at her. "No, Maribel, you are not." Her blood chilled. "How do you know my name?" "I know many things in my city. I'm not your city." "No," he said, rising carefully. "You are the woman who refused my money and treated me because I was bleeding. That makes you something far more rare." A black car rolled out of the rain without headlights, stopping beside the dock like it had grown from the shadows. Mara stepped back, but Dominic did not reach for her. He simply stood there, one hand pressed to his bandage, waiting. "I have a nephew," she said, hating the fear in her own voice. "He needs me." Dominic's expression changed slightly. "Then he will be protected too." "I didn't agree to anything." "No," he said. "You agreed the moment you decided my life was worth saving. Now let me return the favor, before the men who came for me realize you saw their faces." The old lighthouse estate stood on a cliff above the harbor, with waves breaking white against the rocks below and iron gates opening before the car even stopped. It was not the glittering palace Mara expected from a crime lord. It was older, stranger, lonelier. Gray stone walls, tall narrow windows. A tower connected to the main house by a glass walkway. Guards moved through the rain with quiet purpose, but inside the rooms were still and cold. Expensive rugs softened the floors. Paintings watched from dark walls. A fire burned in the main room, yet the house felt untouched by warmth, as if nobody had laughed there in years. Dominic led her upstairs without touching her. That mattered, though Mara did not want it to. He gave her a guest room with a lock on the inside, dry clothes folded on a chair, and a bathroom larger than her old apartment kitchen. Then he stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, his face drained beneath the bronze light. "You should let me close that wound properly," Mara said. "I have men for that." "Then your men should have stopped the bleeding before I found you." His tired eyes held hers. Slowly, he stepped aside and let her work. Later, when the stitches were done and the storm had softened to a low growl outside the windows, Mara found him sitting in a chair near his bed, still fully dressed, staring at nothing. The room was beautiful and lifeless, with dark wood, heavy curtains, and no personal things except a glass of untouched water on the nightstand. "You don't sleep," she said. Dominic did not answer. Mara reached into her satchel and took out the brass metronome. She set it beside the bed and wound it gently. The small arm began to move. Tick, tick, tick. The sound filled the room, plain and steady, almost foolish against all that wealth and silence. "My mother used this with frightened patience," Mara said. "You breathe with it. Don't think. Just follow." Dominic stared at the metronome, as if it were a weapon he did not understand. "Why would you do this for me?" Mara looked at the feared man in the cold room, at the bandage under his shirt, at the shadows beneath his eyes. "Because you're tired." Something in his face shifted then, something guarded and old. He sat back slowly. The ticking continued, soft as a heartbeat. Mara meant to stay only until his breathing evened out. She meant to keep her distance. She meant to remember that this man was dangerous, that kindness did not make him safe, that a wolf with a wound was still a wolf. But minutes passed, and Dominic's eyes grew heavy. His shoulders lowered by the smallest amount. His breathing changed. For the first time in years, the harbor wolf fell asleep, while Mara Bell sat beside him in the dark, listening to the brass metronome count out the fragile proof that both of them were still alive. Morning came slowly to the lighthouse estate, grey and quiet, with rainwater still sliding down the tall windows, and the harbor breathing beneath the cliff, like some great sleeping animal. Mara woke in the chair beside Dominic's bed, with her neck stiff, her hands folded over her mother's satchel, and the brass metronome still ticking softly on the nightstand. For one strange, peaceful second, she forgot where she was. Then she saw the dark room, the heavy curtains, the man asleep beneath the shadow of the headboard, and the memory of the night returned to her all at once. Dominic Vere, the harbor wolf, had slept. Not deeply at first, not easily. But he had slept like a man who had been pulled from deep water and did not yet believe the shore was real. He opened his eyes, just as the lighthouse beam swept pale across the ceiling. For a moment, he did not move. He only looked at Mara, as if he expected her to vanish if he blinked too hard. The metronome clicked between them, steady and small. Mara straightened, embarrassed by the ache in her back and the way her coat had slipped from one shoulder. Dominic's gaze dropped to the metronome, then returned to her face. "You stayed," he said. His voice was rough from sleep, and there was something in it Mara did not know how to answer. Surprise, maybe, or fear. Not the fear of danger, but the fear of being seen needing something. "You were injured," she said. "Someone had to make sure you did not bleed through my stitches." "That is not why you stayed." Mara looked away first. Maybe not. Dominic sat up slowly, one hand touching the bandage near his ribs. The movement made him wince, though he tried to hide it. Mara noticed anyway. Nurses always noticed. She stood and crossed the room before thinking, pressing 2 fingers near the edge of the bandage, checking for heat, swelling, fresh blood. Dominic went still beneath her hands. He did not grab her. He did not lean away. He simply watched her with an attention so complete, it felt heavier than touch. "You need rest," she said. "I need you to stay." The words fell into the room with quiet force. Mara stepped back, her heart quickening. "No. You have no job, no safe place. A nephew who needs medicine. A surgeon with money and friends powerful enough to ruin you before breakfast. I can fix all of that. I am not something you fix." "No," Dominic said. "You are something I protect." Mara almost laughed, but it came out too sharp. That sounds nice, until protection becomes a locked door. Dominic's face changed. He seemed to understand the warning before she finished it. He looked toward the window, where the harbor rolled under the morning fog. "Then make your terms." "My terms?" If you stay as my private nurse, you choose the rules." Mara folded her arms over her soft stomach, grounding herself in the body the world had so often used against her. She had spent years making herself smaller in hospital corridors, in waiting rooms, in offices where thin women with cold smiles acted as though kindness and weight could never share the same body. But there, in that cold room above the harbor, she let herself take up all the space she needed. "I keep my own room," she said, "with a lock only I control. You do not touch my things. You do not decide where I go. I do not help with crime. I do not patch up men who hurt innocent people. I visit Theo whenever I want, and if I say I am leaving, I leave. No threats, no tricks, no men following me into bathrooms or standing outside doors like prison guards." Dominic listened without interrupting, then he nodded once. "Agreed. You agree too easily. I know the value of rare things. I am not rare. I am a nurse with debt, bad shoes, and no current license. You are the first person in years who sat beside me without wanting power over me." His eyes moved to the metronome. "That is rare." Mara did not know what to do with the quiet pain in his voice. It would have been easier if he had been cruel, easier if he had acted like the monster everyone whispered about. But Dominic Vere was not simple. That was the first dangerous thing she learned about him. He could order men to vanish from the docks and then stand silently while a frightened child crossed the street. He could frighten a room with one glance, then lower his voice when speaking to an old woman selling bread outside a shuttered church. He lived inside darkness, but there were lines he would not cross, and over the next few weeks, Mara learned those lines as carefully as she learned the rhythms of his breathing. The lighthouse estate changed slowly after Mara stayed. At first, it fought her. The house was too quiet, too polished, too empty. The kitchen looked like a place where food was displayed but never truly eaten. The library smelled of leather and dust. The wide halls carried every footstep as if the walls were listening. Dominic's men watched her with careful suspicion, though none of them were foolish enough to insult her. Word spread quickly that the boss had brought in a nurse from the storm, and that she spoke to him in a tone no one else dared use. Mara made rules inside the house that nobody expected. She demanded clean linens in the medical room, real meals instead of coffee and whiskey, and proper records for injuries. She sent one of Dominic's men back downstairs when he tried to smoke near an oxygen tank. She made another sit still while she removed broken glass from his palm, scolding him like he was a reckless teenager instead of a man with a gun under his jacket. Dominic watched these moments from doorways with a strange, unreadable expression. Mara never softened her voice for his world. She had spent too long being dismissed to start whispering now. At night, she brought the metronome to Dominic's room. He never asked for it. He never needed to. The first night after she stayed, he sat on the edge of his bed with his shirt open and his wound healing under fresh bandages, pretending he did not care whether she placed the little brass object on his nightstand. The moment it began to tick, his shoulders eased by a fraction. Mara saw it. He saw her see it. Neither of them spoke. The nightmares came anyway. Some nights he woke with a sharp breath, his hand reaching for a weapon that was not there. Some nights he sat in the dark for hours, eyes fixed on the wall. Once, just before dawn, Mara heard him whisper a name, Elena. The name was so soft it barely reached her, but it changed the room. Dominic looked at the metronome as if it had betrayed him. Mara did not ask that morning. She only checked his pulse, set a glass of water within reach, and left him with silence that was not empty. By then, she understood something important about pain. If you chased it too hard, it hid. If you sat near it long enough, sometimes it came out on its own. It happened a week later during another storm. The wind shook the glass walkway between the house and the old tower, and the harbor below crashed white against the rocks. Dominic stood at the window of his study, his face pale in the reflection. On his desk sat reports from his men, maps of clinic supply routes, and Theo's latest inhaler receipt, which Dominic had quietly paid without asking for praise. Mara came in carrying tea she had made because he had forgotten dinner again. "You do not have to hover," he said. "I am not hovering. I am judging." That almost earned a smile. Almost. Then lightning flashed over the water, and Dominic's hand tightened on the edge of the desk. Mara saw his eyes go somewhere else. Somewhere burning, somewhere old. "Elena was my sister," he said at last. Mara set the tea down carefully and waited. "She was 16, too gentle for my family, too gentle for this city. I thought if I became feared enough, no one would touch her. I thought fear could build a wall." His voice stayed calm, but his knuckles were white. "One night my enemies set fire to a safe house. I got there too late. I carried her out, but she was already dying. I held my hand over her heart and felt it slow, then stop. The storm filled the silence after that." Mara felt her own chest tighten, not with shock, but with recognition. She knew that helpless counting. She knew the way a pulse could become the whole world. "My mother died with that metronome beside her," Mara said quietly. "She was a nurse too, better than me. Better than anyone." I sat beside her and counted the spaces between her breaths. I kept thinking, if I counted carefully enough, if I loved her hard enough, I could make her stay. Dominic turned then, and the look on his face hurt more than any confession. There was no pity in it, only understanding. Two people standing on opposite sides of violence and poverty and power, both carrying the same memory in their hands. The moment did not feel romantic. It felt deeper and more frightening than romance. It felt like a door opening inside a locked house. That was the night Dominic began to change around her, not in grand ways, not all at once, but in small human pieces. He ate when she put food in front of him. He slept longer when the metronome ticked. He stopped calling her brave like it was a surprise, and started treating it as fact. And Mara, though she warned herself every day not to soften too much, began to see the man behind the name. He was not innocent. He never pretended to be. But he was not empty either. His power had teeth, but it also had rules. He punished men who preyed on children. He drove drug sellers out of neighborhoods the police ignored. He refused to touch fake medicine, which made the discovery that came later feel less like a business threat and more like a personal insult to the city itself. Theo arrived at the Lighthouse estate on a windy Saturday with his backpack, his inhaler, and a paper boat he had folded from an old grocery receipt. Mara had argued with herself all morning before bringing him. She did not want Dominic's world anywhere near the boy. But Mrs. Alvarez had caught a fever, and Theo needed her. Dominic did not question her decision. He only ordered the guards to remove their weapons from sight, and told the kitchen to make pancakes. Theo stared up at Dominic in the entrance hall, all wide eyes and fearless curiosity. "Are you really called the Harbor Wolf?" Dominic looked briefly at Mara, as if asking how one spoke to a 7-year-old. Mara lifted her brows and gave him no help. "Some people call me that," he said. "Can you build paper boats?" Dominic paused. "No." Theo looked deeply disappointed. "Then I can teach you." That afternoon, the most feared man in Greyhaven sat at the kitchen table while Theo showed him how to fold paper corners. Dominic's first boat looked terrible. Theo told him so with the honesty only children and old nurses could afford. Mara laughed before she could stop herself. Dominic looked up at the sound, and for a second, the cold estate felt warmer than any place Mara had lived in years. Later, Theo drew a picture with crayons from Mara's bag. It showed a giant grey wolf sitting beside a small yellow house. The wolf had sharp teeth but round eyes, and above it Theo had drawn the sun much too large. "Why is the wolf smiling?" Dominic asked. Theo shrugged. "Because someone finally let him come inside." Dominic said nothing for a long time. That drawing went onto his desk before nightfall, held down by a heavy silver paperweight among maps, contracts and secrets. It was the first personal thing Mara ever saw in that room. But peace, in Dominic's world, was never allowed to last without being tested. The test came on a cold night when Mara was carrying clean towels past the lower hall and heard a muffled cry behind a closed door. She froze. Dominic's men stood outside, grim and silent. Inside, a traitor had been dragged in, a man who had sold information about one of Dominic's protected neighborhoods to a gang that moved poison through schoolyards. Mara did not see much. She saw enough. A chair overturned, blood on the floor, Dominic's face hard and distant in a way that made him look like the stories again. That night Mara packed. Her hands shook as she folded Theo's shirts into a bag. Her heart felt split down the center. She was not naive. She had known what Dominic was. But knowing a thing and seeing it breathe in front of you were different wounds. Theo deserved sunlit rooms and safe streets, not guards with guns and whispered orders after midnight. Mara could care for Dominic without letting his darkness become her nephew's home. Dominic found her at the front door before dawn. He looked at the bags, then at Theo sleeping against her shoulder. For a terrible moment, Mara expected anger, possession, a command. Instead, Dominic handed her an envelope. "There is money inside," he said. "Enough for rent, medicine, and time to decide what comes next. The car outside is clean. The driver is not one of mine on paper. He will take you anywhere you ask." Mara stared at him. "You are letting me leave." Dominic's eyes moved to Theo, then back to her. "He deserves safety more than I deserve comfort." Those words hurt because they were not a performance. He meant them. Mara saw the cost of them in the stillness of his face. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. Not because she forgot the blood on the floor, not because she forgave everything she did not understand, but because Dominic had opened the cage door before she had to break it. He had chosen her freedom over his need. Mara stood there for a long time with Theo's warm weight against her chest. Then she lowered the bag. "I am staying," she said. Dominic did not move. "Do not stay out of guilt." "I am not." "Do not stay because you think you can save me." "I am a nurse, Dominic. I know better than that." Her voice softened. "I am staying because I choose to. But this house changes. If Theo is here, there is no blood where he can see it. No business near the kitchen. No fear in the rooms where he sleeps." Dominic bowed his head once, like a man accepting a law. Done. The next trouble did not come from the docks. It came from medicine cabinets in poor clinics, from white bottles with false labels, from patients who trusted a system that had already decided their lives were cheap. Dominic's men found the first shipment near the South Pier. Counterfeit heart medication, sealed in neat boxes, ready to be spread through the clinics serving Greyhaven's poorest neighborhoods. When Mara saw the lot numbers, the room tilted. Cassian Meyer. The name dragged her back to St. Orleans, to the glass office, to the patient whose hand had gone cold in hers while Dr. Meyer stood beneath bright hospital lights pretending grief. Mara spent the night going through the records Dominic's men had seized. Her old notes matched. Her saved files matched. Henry Vale had not died because Mara missed something. He had died because a respected surgeon had chosen profit over breath. Meyer came to her 2 days later in a private garden behind a charity clinic, dressed in a perfect grey coat and carrying a smile as smooth as poison. He offered her everything. Her nursing license restored, her debts erased, a safe apartment, a school fund for Theo, a public apology from the hospital if she signed one statement saying she had been confused, emotional, wrong. For one moment, Mara imagined it. Theo with new shoes, a clean apartment with working heat. Her name returned. No more hiding inside borrowed safety. The temptation was not greed, it was exhaustion. Then she thought of Henry Vale. She thought of her mother washing her hands before every patient, like each life-deserved ceremony. She thought of Dominic trying to sleep beside a ticking metronome, because loss had hollowed him out. She looked at Dr. Meyer and saw a man who had never counted a pulse with love. "No," Mara said. Maya's smile thinned. You are making a mistake. No, she said again, stronger. I made my mistake when I believed men like you would shame easily. After that, the storm moved fast. Dominic discovered the leak inside his own circle. Elias Crane, his polished advisor, the man who knew every route and sat at every table, had been feeding information to Maya. When Dominic confronted him, the betrayal cut deeper than anger. Elias had been trusted, not like a worker, like family. Mara saw Dominic's face after Elias was taken away, and for the first time she understood that even wolves could be wounded by the teeth of their own pack. But Elias had already given Maya one final gift: Dominic's travel route. The ambush came near the old harbor bridge during a storm so violent the road seemed to disappear under sheets of water. Mara was in the back seat beside Dominic when the first impact struck. Glass cracked, metal screamed. Guards shouted through the chaos. Dominic pushed Mara down before she understood what was happening, covering her body with his as bullets tore through the night. She felt him jerk once, then again. His breath hit her ear, sharp and broken. Stay down, he ordered. But blood was already soaking through his shirt. Mara did not remember being afraid after that. Fear became useless. She became hands, voice, command. She told his men where to drive. Not to the hospital. Mia would have eyes there. Not to the estate. Too far. She sent them to an abandoned seaside clinic her mother had once run before funding disappeared and the city forgot the people who needed it most. The clinic stood crooked against the wind, its windows boarded, its rooms cold, and smelling faintly of salt and old antiseptic. Mara moved by flashlight. Dominic's men obeyed her without question as she opened cabinets, tore through expired supplies, boiled water, and laid her mother's satchel on a metal table. The brass metronome came out last. She set it beside Dominic as he faded in and out beneath her hands. Tick, breathe, tick, stay. The wound was bad, worse than she wanted to admit. His pulse fluttered under her fingers, too fast, then too thin. Mara pressed her hand against him and felt the old terror rise, the memory of her mother's breath fading, the helpless counting, the awful space between beats. Only this time, the story did not get to end that way. No, she whispered, then louder. No, Dominic, you do not leave after asking me to stay. His lashes trembled, his lips moved, but no sound came. Mara worked through the dark. She stitched. She packed the wound. She ordered pressure, light, clean cloth, more pressure. Blood covered her hands, her sleeves, the front of her shirt. The metronome ticked, as if it had all the time in the world. Mara did not. She held Dominic's life between her palms and refused to loosen her grip. Hours later, when dawn touched the clinic windows with weak silver light, Dominic's pulse steadied. Mara sank into a chair beside him, shaking so hard she could barely breathe. She pressed her bloody fingers to her mouth and cried without sound. Not because the danger was over. It was not. Not because everything was healed. It was not. She cried because this time the heartbeat stayed. When Dominic woke, his eyes found her before they found the room. He looked ruined and pale and alive. You stayed, he whispered. Mara leaned close, her forehead almost touching his. I'm still here. Those words became the quiet promise between them. Not fancy, not perfect, just true. After Dominic recovered, Greyhaven changed. Not overnight, and not cleanly, but deeply enough that people felt it. Mara's files, hidden and saved when no one believed her, joined Dominic's evidence from the counterfeit medicine network. Shipments were traced, bank accounts opened like rotten fruit. Dr. Cassian Meyer's name moved from charity boards to arrest records. The hospital that had thrown Mara out invited her back with careful apologies and polished statements. The dead patients were finally named as victims. Their families finally heard the truth. Mara was offered her license again. She accepted it, but not the old job. Instead, she opened the clinic by the sea in her mother's old building. Dominic paid for the repairs without putting his name on the door. Mara made sure everyone knew the clinic belonged to the people who walked into it. Dock workers came. Mothers came. Children with coughs and old men with tired hearts came. No one was turned away because their pockets were empty. Theo sat at the front desk after school, drawing paper boats on appointment cards and telling patients the wolf outside was friendly if you did not litter. Dominic changed too, not into a saint. Mara would never have believed such a lie. But he began cutting away the cruelest parts of his empire like dead tissue from a wound. The men who fed on weakness found Greyhaven less welcoming. The neighborhoods he controlled became safer, not softer. He stopped ruling only through fear, and began using fear like a locked gate around something worth protecting. Some nights he still woke from dreams of fire. Some nights he still reached for the past before remembering where he was, but he no longer treated sleep like betrayal. He spoke Elena's name without breaking. He placed Theo's wolf drawing beside a small framed photograph of his sister, and when Mara saw it, she said nothing. She only touched his shoulder as she passed. Months later, the lighthouse estate no longer felt like a museum for a lonely man. Theo's drawings covered the kitchen walls. The big dining table held homework, clinic invoices, half-folded paper boats, and bowls of soup that actually got eaten while still warm. Mara's coat hung by the door beside Dominic's dark one. Her mother's satchel rested in the clinic during the day and came home with her at night. The brass metronome still sat beside their bed, but its sound had changed. It was no longer a guard against fear. It was memory. It was proof. It was the small golden heart of the room. One quiet morning, Dominic woke before the lighthouse beam crossed the ceiling. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he did not wake afraid. No fire waited behind his eyes. No silence opened beneath him. Downstairs, Mara was making breakfast, humming off-key while pans moved on the stove. Theo's laughter rose through the house, bright and wild, followed by the excited bark of the old harbor dog Dominic swore he had not adopted. Dominic lay still and listened. The metronome ticked beside him, steady as a living thing. From below came the sound of the woman who had found him bleeding in the storm and refused his money, refused his cage, refused his darkness when it tried to swallow her, then chose to stay when he finally gave her the freedom to leave. Mara Bell, the fat nurse the world had mocked, doubted, fired, and pushed into the rain, had built a home inside the coldest house in Greyhaven. She had saved patients no one counted. She had brought down a man who hid murder behind a surgeon's smile. She had taught a wolf that being loved did not mean being weakened. It meant someone was listening for your heartbeat in the dark. Dominic rose slowly and walked to the doorway. He could see them from the top of the stairs. Theo stood on a chair, proudly folding a crooked paper boat. Mara turned from the stove, round and soft and beautiful in the morning light, her hair loose over one shoulder, her smile tired and real and meant for him. For years, Greyhaven had feared the harbor wolf. For years, Mara had believed the world would never make room for a woman like her. But in the old lighthouse above the sea, with breakfast warming the air and laughter filling the halls, they found something power could not buy and revenge could not heal. They found a place where no one had to become smaller to be safe. They found a life that kept ticking, steady and brave, long after the storm had passed. The woman who saved the most feared family on the waterfront was not a soldier, not a lawyer, not a spy, and not anyone the underworld would have thought to fear. She was a quiet, fat woman in a faded blue laundromat shirt, working beneath buzzing lights near the old docks, folding strangers' towels while rain beat against the windows like nervous fingers. Most people walked past Ria Calder without giving her a second look. They saw her wide hips, her soft arms, her plain face, her tired shoes, and decided there was nothing important hiding there. They were wrong. Ria had spent her whole life learning the secret language of things people missed. A hand that trembled too much, a smile that came too late, a silence that was not peace, but pain. And on the night Dante Varro's sister walked into the laundromat alone, speaking into her own palm while the whole city looked away, Ria became the first person in years brave enough to answer. The laundromat was called Brightspin, though nothing about it was bright anymore. The sign outside had lost 2 letters, the tiles were cracked, and half the dryers sounded like they were full of loose change and angry ghosts. It sat at the edge of the waterfront, where the good streets ended and the old dock roads began. Trucks passed by all night, groaning under loads no one asked too many questions about. The smell of rain, salt, detergent and diesel always hung in the air. Ria worked the night shift because no one else wanted it, and because the night had always suited her better than daylight. Daylight asked too much from people. It wanted smiles, quick answers, clean clothes, bright voices. The night allowed silence. The night allowed people to be tired. Ria Calder was 30 years old and had built a life out of being useful without being noticed. She kept the change machine working with a screwdriver and patience. She knew which dryer ran too hot, which washer stole quarters, and which regular customers liked to talk while their clothes spun. She knew the dock workers who washed blood out of their sleeves and called it engine grease. She knew the young mothers who came in after midnight because the machines in their apartment buildings were broken again. She knew the old men who carried trash bags full of laundry and pretended they were not lonely. Ria saw them all. Most of them did not truly see her back. That had never surprised her. The world had taught Ria early that a fat woman with a gentle voice was easy to ignore. People spoke around her, over her, sometimes through her, as if her body took up space but her soul did not. Men at the corner store called her sweetheart in the voice they used for someone harmless. Women in clean coats looked at her grocery cart and made little judgments with their eyes. Customers at the laundromat asked if the manager was around while Ria stood in her name tag, holding the keys. She had learned not to fight every small insult. Some days, survival meant letting cruel people believe they had understood you. But Ria understood people. That was her gift, though she had never called it that out loud. She understood the way fear made people mean. She understood the way grief made people still. She understood the way a person could be surrounded by noise and still be completely alone. She had learned most of that from her grandmother, Elise Calder, who had lost her hearing first, then most of her sight, and then the easy place she once held in the world. When Ria was a teenager, she became her grandmother's hands. She learned to spell into her palm, to guide her fingers over objects, to press meaning into skin with patience and care. Tactile signing was not just language. It was trust. It was saying, "I am here, and I will not leave you in the dark." Long after her grandmother passed, Ria's hands still remembered. They remembered the slow shape of words. They remembered how to ask permission before touching. They remembered how to make another person feel safe without raising a voice. It was not a skill anyone at Brightspin cared about. It did not earn extra pay. It did not make her rent cheaper. It simply lived inside her, quiet and waiting, like a lamp in a window no one had yet needed. The storm came in hard that Thursday night, rolling over the harbor with a low growl that shook the thin glass of the laundromat windows. By 9, the streets were shining black. By 10, the gutters were running fast. By 11, most customers had left, except for a dock worker sleeping in a plastic chair near washer 4 and a college boy watching his clothes spin with the haunted look of someone who had run out of clean socks and life plans. Ria stood behind the counter, sorting lost socks into a basket, when the bell over the door gave a small, tired ring. The woman who entered did not belong there. That was the first thing Ria noticed, not because she was beautiful, though she was, in a pale, polished, distant way. Not because of her expensive cream-colored coat, though it looked softer than anything Rhea had ever owned. It was the way the air changed around her. The laundromat seemed to become smaller, dimmer, more aware of itself. Outside, through the rain-streaked glass, 2 black cars idled at the curb. Men in dark coats stood near them, broad and still, their eyes scanning the street. Bodyguards, Rhea thought, and felt a quiet warning move through her chest. The woman stepped inside alone. She held a folded white cane in one hand, though she was not using it in the usual way. Her face was turned slightly toward the room, but her eyes did not focus on anything. Her dark hair was pinned neatly at the back of her head. She looked maybe 35, maybe younger, but there was something old in her stillness, something tired. She moved with the careful grace of a person who had been guided too often and trusted the world too little. The college boy looked up, saw the men outside, and quickly looked back down. The sleeping dock worker kept snoring. Rhea straightened behind the counter, unsure whether to speak. Before she could decide, the woman crossed to the row of dryers and sat in the orange plastic chair closest to the back wall. She placed her cane across her lap. Then she lifted one hand and began tapping against her own palm. Rhea froze. At first, the movements were small. A brush of fingers, 2 taps, a pause, a shape pressed into skin. The woman's face remained calm, but her hand moved with urgency, like a bird trapped behind glass. She was not fidgeting. She was not anxious in the way strangers might assume. She was speaking, or trying to. Speaking into silence because no one in the room knew how to listen. Rhea felt the years fold in on themselves. She was 16 again, sitting beside her grandmother's bed, pressing words into a thin, warm palm while the television flashed soundless colors across the wall. She remembered her grandmother's first tears when Rhea had learned enough to say, "I love you," with her hands. She remembered the terrible lesson that loneliness did not always look like crying. Sometimes loneliness looked calm. Sometimes it wore pearls and an expensive coat, and sat perfectly still beneath broken laundromat lights. Rhea came out from behind the counter slowly. She did not rush. Rushing could frighten someone who lived through touch. She walked around the folding tables and stopped a few feet away from the woman. "Hi," Rhea said softly, though she knew the woman likely could not hear her. "My name is Rhea. I'm going to touch your hand now, only if that's okay." The woman did not respond. Her fingers kept moving against her palm, repeating the same pattern, sharper now. Rhea understood enough to catch pieces. Where? Late. Brother. Not here. Cold. Too much. The words were broken, pressed inward, meant for someone absent. Rhea knelt carefully in front of her, ignoring the ache in her knees and the way her shirt pulled at her stomach. She held out her hands, palms up, not touching yet. The woman's fingers brushed the air, then found Rhea's wrist. The moment their skin met, the woman stopped breathing. Rhea gently turned the woman's hand over and signed into her palm. "Hello, my name is Rhea. You are safe." The woman went utterly still. It was not fear. It was shock so deep, it almost looked like pain. Her fingers tightened around Rhea's hand. Then, with trembling speed, she answered, "You know." Rhea swallowed around the sudden tightness in her throat. "Yes," she signed back. "I know." The woman's face broke. There was no other word for it. Her mouth trembled, her chin folded, and silent tears slipped down her cheeks with a force that made Rhea's own eyes burn. She leaned forward, gripping Rhea's hands as if they were the edge of a cliff. Words poured from her fingers, uneven and desperate. "No one answers. They move me, feed me, dress me, smile. No one answers." Rhea had to close her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, she signed slowly, making every word clear. "I am answering now." The woman touched Rhea's wrist, then her own chest. "Viola." Rhea smiled gently. Viola, beautiful name. Viola's mouth lifted in a small, trembling smile. And that was when the door to the laundromat opened again. The bell did not ring this time. It snapped against the glass like it had been struck. The two men from outside entered first, rain shining on their shoulders, eyes hard, hands close to their jackets. Behind them came a man who carried the storm with him. Dante Varro was not loud. He did not need to be. He stepped into the laundromat with the calm of a man used to rooms becoming quiet for him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black coat that looked simple until the light caught the cut of it. His dark hair was wet from the rain, his face sharp and controlled, his eyes so cold they seemed almost silver under the fluorescent lights. Everyone on the waterfront knew his name, even people who pretended they did not. Dante Varro owned half the docks, frightened the other half, and had enough city officials in his pocket to make trouble disappear before sunrise. Ria knew who he was because everyone knew. She had heard his name in whispers from customers who lowered their voices when black cars passed the laundromat. She had heard dock workers laugh too hard when someone mentioned the Varro family, the way people laughed when they were trying to hide fear. She had seen men with bruised faces become very polite when one of Dante's cars rolled by. He was the kind of man the city warned itself about without ever saying the full warning out loud. His eyes found Viola first. Then they dropped to Viola's hand wrapped around Ria's. Every guard in the room tensed. Dante moved forward. "Step away from my sister." His voice was low, smooth, and dangerous in a way that did not need shouting. The college boy gathered his wet laundry into his arms and fled out the side door without waiting for the dryer to finish. The dock worker woke, took one look at Dante, and pretended very hard to still be asleep. Ria's heart began to pound. She should have let go. Any sensible person would have let go. But Viola's fingers tightened around hers in fear, and Ria could not abandon her back into silence. Not for Dante Varro, not for anyone. "She doesn't want me to step away," Ria said, keeping her voice gentle even as fear crawled up her spine. Dante's gaze cut to her face. For a moment, Ria felt the full force of him. Men like Dante did not usually look at women like her unless they wanted something moved, cleaned, served, or blamed. His stare was not cruel, exactly. It was measuring, suspicious, used to finding lies before they had time to bloom. "You know her?" he asked. "No," Ria said, "but I know what she's saying." Something shifted in his face. It was small, almost invisible, but Ria saw it, a crack in the stone. Dante looked at Viola, then back at Ria. "What did you say?" Ria turned Viola's hand gently and signed. "Your brother is here. He is worried. I will tell him if you want." Viola answered quickly. "Tell him I was not lost. I was tired of being carried through my own life." Ria drew in a quiet breath. That was not the kind of message a man like Dante Varro would enjoy hearing. But Viola's hand waited inside hers, trusting her with the words. Ria looked up at Dante. "She says she wasn't lost. She says she was tired of being carried through her own life." The laundromat became so quiet that even the dryers seemed to soften. Dante stared at Ria as if she had spoken a spell. His jaw tightened. One of the guards shifted, but Dante lifted 2 fingers and the man went still. "What else?" Dante asked. Ria signed the question to Viola, who answered more slowly this time, her fingers shaking. "He loves me like a locked room. Tell him I am inside." The words hurt. Ria felt them land in her own chest before she gave them away. She looked at Dante, and for the first time since he entered, she saw something in him that was not power. It was fear. Deep, hidden, furious fear. "She says you love her like a locked room," Ria said softly. "She says she is inside." Dante did not speak. Rain ran down the windows behind him. His men stared at the floor. Viola sat between them, holding Ria's hand, her face wet with silent tears. For a long moment, Dante looked like a man who had been shot somewhere no one could see. Then he stepped closer and crouched in front of his sister. The movement surprised Rhea. It was careful, almost humble. He reached for Viola's free hand, and she allowed it, but her other hand stayed locked around Rhea's. Dante touched his sister's knuckles with his lips. "Viola," he whispered. Viola could not hear him. Rhea knew that. But maybe she felt something in the way his breath warmed her skin, or in the familiar shape of his hand. Her face softened, though she still did not let go. Dante looked at Rhea. "Tell her I'm taking her home." Rhea signed it. Viola's answer came at once. With Rhea, Dante went still. Rhea blinked. "She says only if I come too." "No," Dante said immediately. Viola's fingers moved again, sharper. "Then I stay." Rhea almost smiled, despite everything. There was steel in Viola Varro. Soft, hidden steel, but steel all the same. Dante stood. The quiet control returned to his face, but it did not fit as perfectly now. He looked at Rhea from her damp sneakers to her laundromat shirt to the tired bun slipping loose at the back of her head. Rhea felt every inch of herself under that gaze, her round stomach, her thick arms, the detergent stain near her pocket, the plainness of her. She expected dismissal. She was used to it. Instead, Dante said, "What is your name?" "Rhea Calder." "Do you have family here, Miss Calder?" "No." "A husband? Boyfriend? Someone waiting for you?" The question was cold, practical, and somehow too personal. Rhea lifted her chin. "No." "Good," Dante said, then glanced toward one of his men. "Pay the owner for the night. Double whatever she makes in a month." Rhea stood quickly. "Wait, I didn't agree to anything." Dante looked back at her. "My sister did. She asked me to come with her. That doesn't mean I belong to you." His eyes sharpened, and for one breath, the dangerous man returned in full. "No one said you belong to me." But the way he said it made the air feel warmer and more dangerous at the same time. Rhea should have refused. She knew that later, when her life had already changed, she would look back at that exact second and wonder what would have happened if she had simply pulled away. But Viola's hand found hers again, searching, afraid. Rhea thought of her grandmother. She thought of all the years Viola had been trapped in a house full of people who loved her but did not know how to reach her. She thought of the words, "I am inside." So Rhea signed into Viola's palm, "I will come for tonight." Viola's shoulders lowered in relief. Dante watched the exchange with an expression Rhea could not read. "For tonight," he repeated. The Varro estate sat on a rise above the old docks, hidden behind iron gates, black pines, and stone walls high enough to make the rest of the city feel very far away. The mansion itself looked less like a home than a place built to survive a siege. Warm lights glowed in tall windows. Cameras followed every movement. Men with earpieces stood under the rain with the stillness of statues. Rhea sat in the back of Dante's car beside Viola, her hands resting in her lap, trying not to stare at the leather seats or the dark glass or the gun beneath the driver's jacket. Dante sat across from them, silent. He had not taken his eyes off his sister for more than a few seconds since they left the laundromat. It was clear he loved her. That was not the question. Love was everywhere around Viola. It was in the armored car, the guards, the locked gates, the careful driver, the expensive coat wrapped around her shoulders. But love, Rhea knew, could still be lonely when it did not know how to listen. Inside the mansion, people rushed toward them the moment the doors opened. A housekeeper with silver hair, a nurse in pale blue scrubs, 2 guards, a thin woman carrying a blanket. All of them looked relieved, then confused when they saw Rhea. "Miss Viola," the nurse breathed, reaching for her. Viola stepped back and found Rhea's hand. The nurse stopped, wounded and unsure. Dante's voice cut through the hall. "No one touches her unless she agrees." Everyone froze. Rhea looked at him. He was watching Viola, not the staff. Maybe he had never noticed how often people reached for his sister without asking. Maybe he was noticing now. The entrance hall was grand enough to make Rhea feel like she had mud on her soul. Marble floors, tall ceilings, dark wood, huge paintings of serious men who had probably never folded their own shirts. The air smelled like beeswax, roses, and money. Rhea wanted to hide her hands in her pockets, but Viola needed them, so she kept them open. Dante led them to a quiet sitting room with a fire burning low in the hearth. The staff hovered until he sent them away with one look. Then only the three of them remained. "What does she need?" Dante asked. Rhea guided Viola to a sofa and sat beside her. "You should ask her. I don't know how." There was no anger in the answer. That surprised Rhea more than anything. Dante Varro, feared by a city, had just admitted there was something he did not know. Rhea took his hand before she could lose courage. His fingers were warm, calloused, and strong. He looked down at their hands as if no one touched him without permission either. "Give me your hand," she said. "Open your palm." He obeyed, slowly. Rhea placed Viola's hand over his and guided the first simple sign into his skin. "Brother." Viola felt it. Her lips parted. Rhea guided Dante's hand again. "Home." Viola's face changed. Not much, just enough. A small tremble near the mouth, a softening around the eyes. She reached forward and touched Dante's palm herself. Her fingers moved with careful hope. Dante looked at Rhea. "She says," Rhea whispered, "you are late." For one strange second, Dante Varro laughed. It was not a big laugh. It was rough and quiet, like something pulled from a locked drawer, but it warmed the room more than the fire. Viola smiled, feeling the shape of it somehow. Maybe in his hand, maybe in the air, maybe in the old bond between them that loneliness had not killed. Then Viola signed again. Rhea's own smile faded. "She says she has been waiting a long time." Dante looked down. The mansion seemed to hold its breath. That night, Rhea did not leave. No one asked her to, and Viola refused to release her until she became too tired to sit up. Rhea helped explain each step before the nurse touched her. Shoes off, coat off, tea coming, blanket. Dante stayed in the room the whole time, watching like a man learning the shape of a new world. When Viola finally slept, her hand rested open on the blanket, no longer curled inward around words no one could hear. Dante walked Rhea to the hallway. It was nearly 3 in the morning. The storm had softened to a steady rain. "You will stay," he said. Rhea gave a tired laugh. "You say that like weather. I can make it a request. That would be a nice change." His mouth almost moved. Not quite a smile, but the memory of one. "Please stay, Miss Calder, for my sister." Rhea looked past him into the room where Viola slept. She thought of the laundromat, the broken sign, the paycheck that barely covered rent, the world that had never noticed whether she came or went. Then she looked at Dante Varro, a man who could buy almost anything and had somehow missed the one thing his sister needed most. "For Viola," Rhea said. "Not for your money, not because of your guards, and not because you're used to people saying yes." His gaze held hers. "For Viola. And if I stay, everyone learns. Not just the nurse, not just one assistant. Everyone who touches her life learns how to speak to her. Maids, cooks, drivers, guards, you." Dante was silent. Rhea waited. She had never spoken to a dangerous man this way before. Her voice was calm, but her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. At last he said, "Everyone." The next morning, the Varro mansion began to change by the smallest possible measure, one hand at a time. Rhea stood in the breakfast room wearing yesterday's clothes, her hair coming loose, her body aching from too little sleep, and taught a row of nervous staff how to say good morning into an open palm. They were terrible at it. The cook pressed too hard. One guard kept forgetting the order of the signs. The driver looked as if he would rather face bullets than embarrass himself in front of Viola. Dante stood at the back of the room with his arms crossed, watching every movement with a hard, unreadable face. Ria did not let him hide there. "Your turn," she said. Every person in the room looked at Dante as if Ria had just slapped him. Dante slowly uncrossed his arms. "Show me again." She did. He listened, not with his ears, but with his eyes, with his focus, with the full weight of a man used to mastering whatever stood in front of him. His first attempt was stiff. His second was better. His third made Viola laugh. No one in the room expected the sound. It was small, breathy, uneven, but it was laughter. The staff stared. The cook began to cry into her apron. The driver turned away quickly. Dante froze with his fingers still resting in Viola's palm. Viola corrected his sign, then made him do it again. This time, Dante Varro smiled. Ria felt something open in the room, not loudly, not all at once, but enough to feel, like a window cracked after years of stale air. The mansion was still guarded, the walls were still high. Men with guns still walked the grounds. But beneath all of that, something human had begun to move. Over the next few days, Ria became the quiet center of the house. She taught at the long dining table, in the garden room, by the kitchen door, beside the piano Viola had once loved but no longer played. She made simple practice cards with raised marks. She showed the staff how to approach from the front, how to offer a hand, how to wait for permission. She explained that helping was not the same as taking over. She reminded them that Viola was not a porcelain doll, not a shadow, not a duty. Viola was a woman with opinions, jokes, memories, and a temper that became clearer every day. And Dante watched it all. At first, he watched like a boss making sure a job was done, then like a brother afraid to hope. Then, slowly, like a man seeing Ria colder for reasons that had nothing to do with his sister. Ria felt it sometimes when she looked up and caught his gaze across a room. It was not the dismissive glance she was used to. It did not slide past her body or pause with judgment. It stayed, it studied, it warmed and unsettled her. She did not know what to do with a look like that. One evening, after a long lesson with the guards, Ria found Dante alone in the garden room. Rain tapped softly against the glass ceiling. He stood beside a table covered in practice cards, trying one sign again and again against his own palm. "You're pressing too hard," Ria said. He looked up. She never complained. She's used to people being clumsy with her. The words came out softer than an accusation, but they landed anyway. Dante lowered his hand. Ria stepped closer and took it. "Here, like this." She guided his fingers, gentle but firm. His hand was much larger than hers, scarred across the knuckles, made for violence, if stories were true, but under her touch, it became careful, almost uncertain. Dante watched her face. "You're not afraid of correcting me." "I am," Ria admitted. "I just do it anyway." That made his eyes change. A quiet spark, gone almost as soon as it appeared. "Why?" "Because Viola deserves better than everyone being too scared of you to tell the truth." The rain filled the silence between them. "And what do I deserve?" he asked. Ria should have stepped back. The room suddenly felt too warm, too still. "You deserve to know her," she said. "Not just protect her, know her." Dante looked down at their hands. For a moment, he seemed less like the king of the waterfront and more like a man standing outside a locked door with no idea how to open it. "I thought if no one could reach her, no one could hurt her," he said. Ria's throat tightened. "That's not safety. That's a softer kind of cage." His jaw flexed, but he did not argue. Outside, thunder moved far away over the water. Before either of them could speak again, the door opened. A guard stepped inside, stiff and uneasy. "Mr. Varro," he said, "there's a man at the gate, Adrian Locke. He says he's the disability consultant from Boston. He has papers. Dante's face hardened at once, the soft moment vanishing behind the old wall. I didn't call a consultant. The guard swallowed. He says your uncle did. Says he heard about Miss Viola and wants to help modernize her care. Ria felt Dante's hand close slightly around hers before he let go. Something cold moved through the warm garden room. Ria did not know the name Adrian Locke. She had never seen his face. But she had spent her whole life reading what people tried to hide, and the timing of this stranger felt wrong. Too neat, too polished, too soon after Viola had started coming back to herself. Dante looked at Ria. Stay behind me. Ria looked toward the rain-dark windows, toward the guarded gates, toward the house that had only just begun learning how to listen. Then she thought of Viola, laughing for the first time in years. No, Ria said quietly. If he says he speaks her language, then I need to see his hands. Adrian Locke arrived at the Varro estate in a silver town car that looked too clean for a rain-soaked dock road. That was the first thing Ria noticed from the tall front window. The second thing she noticed was the man himself. He stepped out beneath a black umbrella held by one of Dante's guards, dressed in a soft grey coat, polished shoes, and a calm smile that had clearly been practiced in mirrors. He was handsome in a neat, careful way, with pale eyes, smooth hair, and a leather satchel tucked under one arm like he had stepped out of an office where no one ever raised their voice. Nothing about him looked dangerous. That was exactly why Ria did not trust him. Dante stood beside her in the entrance hall, his face unreadable, his hands relaxed at his sides, but Ria had learned by now that his stillness was never empty. It was the silence before a blade left its sheath. Around them, the household had gone quiet. The maids moved slower. The guards watched the door with colder eyes. Even the old grandfather clock seemed to tick more softly, as if the whole mansion understood that something unwanted had crossed the gate. Let him in, Dante said. The doors opened, and Adrian Locke walked inside with a warm smile already waiting on his face. Mr. Varro, he said, extending his hand, I'm grateful you agreed to see me on such short notice. Your uncle spoke very highly of your concern for your sister. Dante did not take the hand right away. He looked at it, then at Adrian's face, and only after a long second did he shake it. My uncle has a generous mouth. Adrian's smile twitched, but recovered quickly. Families worry, especially families with resources. Miss Varro deserves the most advanced care available. Ria heard the word care and felt a quiet tightening in her chest. People used that word when they wanted to sound kind. Sometimes it was kind, sometimes it was a soft blanket thrown over control. Adrian turned toward her. His eyes swept over her laundromat shirt, her simple skirt, her soft body, her hair tied back with a plain elastic. It was only a second, but Ria caught it, the little pause, the quick decision. He had looked at her and decided she was an obstacle, but not a difficult one. You must be Miss Calder, he said. I've heard you've been helping with Viola's communication. Helping? Ria said. How wonderful. I'm always moved when ordinary people step forward. There it was, sweet as honey and sharp as a needle. Ordinary people. Ria smiled politely, because women like her were expected to soften themselves around men like him. Viola is in the garden room. Excellent, Adrian said. I'd love to observe her natural communication style before I begin. Ria looked at Dante. No observing from a distance. If he says he speaks her language, he should introduce himself properly. Dante's eyes moved to Adrian. You heard her. For the first time, Adrian's confidence cooled, only a little. Of course. They found Viola seated near the glass doors, her face turned toward the pale morning light. One of the cooks had placed a warm mug of tea beside her, and her fingers rested lightly against the table, waiting. Since Ria had come to the estate, Viola waited differently. Before, the staff said, she used to sit folded into herself, still as a figure in a painting. Now there was expectation in her hands. There was readiness. She knew someone might answer. Ria touched Viola's wrist gently, then signed into her palm. "A visitor is here. He says he knows tactile signing." Viola's fingers moved. "Does he?" Ria's mouth curved. "We will see." Adrian sat across from Viola with elegant care. He opened his satchel and took out a folder, a tablet, and several laminated cards with raised symbols. They were expensive, professionally printed, and completely unnecessary. Then he reached for Viola's hand without asking. Ria caught his wrist before he touched her. The room went still. Adrian looked at her hand on him as if a mop had grabbed his sleeve. "Miss Calder, you ask first," Ria said. "I understand boundaries," he replied, still smiling. "This is part of the assessment. Then assess her right to say no." Dante said nothing, but the air behind Ria turned colder. Adrian slowly drew his hand back. He cleared his throat, then tapped lightly on the table to get Viola's attention. The tap was wrong, too sharp, too sudden. Viola flinched. Ria felt Dante shift behind her. Adrian took Viola's hand more carefully this time, after Ria signed and Viola agreed. He began to form words into her palm. The shapes were technically correct. Not perfect, but correct enough to fool someone who wanted to be fooled. His fingers moved in memorized patterns, the way a person might recite a poem in a language they did not understand. There was no listening in it, no waiting, no warmth. He signed at Viola, not with her. Viola's face tightened. Ria watched his thumb. It kept pressing the same place when he paused. A nervous habit. His timing was too even. Real tactile conversation breathed. It changed with the person receiving it. Adrian's signs had the rhythm of a man counting steps through a room he had never lived in. Viola answered him once, then again. Adrian nodded, like he understood, but his reply had nothing to do with what she had said. Ria's suspicion settled into certainty. "What did she tell you?" Ria asked. Adrian looked up. "She said she's pleased to meet me and is looking forward to developing independence through a structured program." Viola's fingers curled in Ria's hand. Ria kept her voice calm. "No. She said your hands feel empty." The words landed hard. Adrian's smile disappeared for half a breath before he found it again. "Interpretation can be subjective." "Not that subjective." Dante stepped forward. "Leave us." Adrian rose slowly. "Mr. Varro, I assure you, resistance from existing caregivers is common. Miss Calder has formed an emotional attachment, which is understandable, but not clinically useful." Ria looked at him then, really looked. "Say her name." "Excuse me." "Viola." "Say her name into her hand." Adrian glanced at Dante, then back at Ria. "This is unnecessary." "Say it." He reached for Viola's hand again. Ria did not stop him this time. Adrian signed the name carefully, too carefully. Viola's brow furrowed. She pulled her hand back and touched Ria's wrist. "Wrong," Viola signed. Ria turned to Dante. He spelled it wrong. Dante's face changed so quietly that the room seemed to lose temperature. "My sister's name is on every document in that folder." Adrian swallowed. "A simple slip." "No," Ria said. "A simple slip is when someone nervous makes a mistake. He didn't make a nervous mistake. He made a stranger's mistake." Dante looked toward the doorway. 2 guards stepped inside before he even spoke. "Take Mr. Locke to the blue office," Dante said, politely. Adrian's face finally lost its polish. "Mr. Varro, this is absurd. I came here under professional invitation. And now you will stay under mine." The guards took his arms. Adrian did not fight, but his eyes flicked toward Ria as he was led away. There was no warmth left in them, only anger. Clean, bright anger. The kind that promised memory. By sunset, Dante's investigators had taken Adrian Locke apart, piece by piece, without leaving a mark on him. His degrees were forged. His references led to disconnected numbers and rented mailboxes. His consulting company had been created 3 weeks earlier. The money behind it moved through shell charities and private medical suppliers until it finally touched the name Dante had expected and dreaded: the Belandi family. Rivals from the north side, old enemies with patient hands and bitter memories. Their plan had been quiet and cruel. Adrian would gain access through Viola's care. He would arrange outside appointments, recommend new equipment, bring in devices, passwords, schedules, private routes, hospital contacts, security codes hidden inside the language of help. No guns at the gate, no war in the streets, just one smiling man using a lonely woman as a doorway. Dante read the report in silence. Ria stood across from his desk, arms folded over her stomach, suddenly cold despite the fire burning nearby. They knew Viola was isolated. Yes, Dante said. They knew no one here could tell if he was real. Yes, Ria's voice softened. They knew because you built the perfect opening for them. Dante looked up. Any other man in his position might have shouted. Dante did not. That made it worse. His pain moved behind his eyes like dark water beneath ice. I know, he said. Ria had not expected that. Her anger loosened, and underneath it was sadness. I'm sorry. Don't be. He set the report down. Truth should not apologize for arriving late. From that night forward, Dante trusted Ria in a way that made the entire mansion notice. He did not simply ask whether Viola had eaten or slept. He asked what she had said, what she had refused, what had made her laugh, what made her tired. He sat through lessons with the discipline of a soldier, his large hands slowly learning gentleness. He made his guards practice until their fingers stopped shaking. He fired 2 staff members who still spoke over Viola as if she were furniture. He brought in deaf-blind adults, real teachers, real advocates, people who entered the house not as decoration, but as experts. Viola changed under all of it, not into someone new. Into someone uncovered. She chose her own clothes. She demanded cinnamon in her coffee. She walked the garden paths with one hand on Ria's arm and one hand free to touch leaves, stone, rain, sunlight. She corrected Dante when he signed badly and seemed to enjoy doing it. She began sitting at the dinner table again, and the first time she signed a dry little joke about one of Dante's serious men looking like a frightened statue, the whole staff laughed so hard the cook dropped a spoon. And Ria changed too, though she tried not to. At first, she told herself she was only staying until Viola had enough people around her. Then she told herself she was staying until the staff became confident. Then until the new teachers settled in. Then until the Belandi threat passed. Every excuse was smaller than the truth. She had begun to care for that house, for Viola, for the strange little warmth growing in rooms that had once felt cold enough to preserve grief forever. And for Dante. That was the part she kept hidden even from herself as long as she could. Dante Varro was still dangerous. Nothing about that changed. Men called him from the docks at midnight and lowered their voices when they spoke. Cars arrived at the estate with tinted windows and left with decisions no one explained. He was not gentle with his enemies. He was not innocent. But with Viola, he became careful. With Ria, he became quiet in a way that felt less like control and more like listening. Sometimes, late at night, she found him in the garden room practicing signs alone. Sometimes, he brought her tea without asking how she liked it, because he had learned. Sometimes, when she spoke, he gave her his full attention, and Ria, who had lived most of her life being glanced over, found that attention more frightening than any gun. The charity gala came 6 weeks after Adrian Locke was exposed. Dante did not want to attend, but Viola insisted. It was a fundraiser for disabled artists, held in the old Maritime Museum near the waterfront. All glass ceilings, polished floors, and long shadows from ships that had not touched water in 100 years. Viola wanted to go because 3 deaf-blind artists were showing their work, and because, as she told Rhea, she was tired of the world coming to her only through safe rooms. Rhea wore a deep green dress Dante had sent to her suite, simple and soft, with sleeves that made her feel comfortable and a cut that did not try to hide her body. She almost changed out of it twice. Then Viola touched the fabric, smiled and signed, "Beautiful." Rhea stopped arguing with the mirror after that. Dante saw her at the bottom of the stairs and forgot, for one visible second, how to speak. That almost undid her. "You look," he began, then stopped. Rhea lifted one eyebrow, careful. His mouth curved faintly, "Like yourself." It was the best compliment anyone had ever given her. The gala glittered with money and soft music. Donors smiled too brightly. Reporters hovered near the entrance. Politicians shook Dante's hand with the nervous respect of men who owed him favors but hoped no one noticed. Rhea stayed near Viola, signing the room into her hands. Warm lights, many people, glass sculpture on the left. Woman in red staring too much. Viola smiled at that. For a while, everything was almost beautiful. Then the lights went out. The darkness fell so fast the crowd gasped, as one body. A second later, alarms screamed. Smoke poured from vents along the wall, not thick enough to kill, but enough to blind and confuse. People began shouting. Chairs scraped. Glass broke. Hearing guests turned toward the alarms and ran the wrong way. Security men moved toward voices, toward radios, toward orders. Viola froze. The world had vanished around her. Rhea felt her hand tighten, felt the old terror flood back into her body. No sight, no sound, no clear direction. Only chaos pressing in from every side. Rhea did not scream. She did not wait for Dante. She moved. 2 taps to the wrist, 1 pull toward the heart. "Come to me." Viola responded instantly, like a flower turning toward sun. Rhea wrapped one arm around her and began guiding her low through the smoke. Bodies shoved past them. Someone knocked into Rhea's shoulder hard enough to make her stumble. She kept hold of Viola. Another alarm shrieked from the far wall. Rhea ignored it. Noise lied. Touch did not. She reached the side corridor they had walked earlier, counting steps in her head. 12 to the display case. Turn. 6 to the staff door. Her lungs burned. Her eyes watered. Viola's fingers clung to hers with painful force. Then Rhea saw the man at the end of the corridor. He wore a server's jacket, but he moved like no waiter she had ever seen. His face was covered by a black mask. His hand came up, and the small dark shape in it pointed toward Viola. Rhea did not think. She turned her body between them. The sound was not like movies. It was smaller, sharper, a crack that split the smoky dark. Pain opened in Rhea's side, hot and stunning. Her knees hit the floor. Viola fell with her, still holding her hands. Rhea could hear nothing but her own breath, rough and wet in her chest. The masked man came closer. Then Dante arrived. He came through the smoke like the answer to every fear the room had ever held. He moved fast, silent, terrible. His guard hit the attacker from the side, and Dante was already on the ground beside Rhea before the man's weapon had finished skidding across the floor. Rhea. His voice broke on her name. She wanted to tell him she was fine, but her mouth did not work right. Viola's hands were frantic in hers, asking, asking, asking. Rhea forced her fingers to move. "Safe. You are safe. Dante is here." Viola sobbed without sound and pressed Rhea's hand to her heart. Dante took off his jacket and pressed it against Rhea's wound. His hands were steady, but his face was not. "Stay with me." Rhea looked at him through smoke and tears. "Don't let go of her." "I won't. Promise." His eyes burned. "I promise." Only then did Rhea let the dark take her. When she woke, the world smelled like antiseptic and rain. For one terrible second, She thought she was back beside her grandmother's hospital bed, young and helpless and praying with both hands. Then she felt warmth around her fingers. Dante sat beside her, holding her hand like it was something sacred. His face was unshaven. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes looked like he had threatened sleep and lost. Viola sat on the other side of the bed, her hand resting lightly on Ria's wrist. Ria tried to speak. Her throat hurt. "Is she okay?" Dante closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something in him had changed forever. "Because of you." Ria looked at Viola and moved her fingers weakly. "Bossy woman." Viola burst into quiet laughter and signed back against Ria's palm. "Brave woman." Ria cried then. Not loudly. Just enough for Dante to lean forward and press his forehead to her hand. The attack did what years of business wars had not done. It changed Dante Varro's idea of power. The Belandi family had tried to use darkness, noise, and confusion as weapons. Ria had answered with one touch signal, one promise, one body placed between danger and the woman everyone had mistaken for helpless. Dante understood then, in a way no report or lesson could have taught him, that protection without understanding was only a wall, and walls could be breached. Understanding moved. Understanding reached. Understanding found you in the dark. While Ria recovered, Dante began tearing apart pieces of his empire and rebuilding them into something the city could see. Warehouses became legitimate shipping companies. Hidden accounts became public foundations. Men who had once collected debts in alleys were reassigned, retired, or removed from his world entirely. People said Dante Varro had gone soft. Those people did not say it twice. He had not gone soft. He had become precise about what deserved his strength. He created the Calder Bridge project before Ria was even well enough to argue about the name. When he first told her, she stared at him from her hospital bed. "You named it after me?" "Yes, Dante." It teaches hospitals, police stations, shelters, schools, and public offices how to communicate with deaf-blind and nonverbal people. It funds interpreters, training, emergency touch systems, and family education. You named all of that after a woman who worked nights at a laundromat. Dante's gaze did not move from hers. "I named it after the woman who taught me that being heard can save a life." Ria had no answer for that. So she cried again, which annoyed her, and Dante pretended not to notice, which made her love him a little more. The first Calder Bridge Center opened 3 months later near the waterfront, in a brick building that had once been used to store cargo no one admitted owning. Now the windows were clean, the doors were wide, and the rooms inside were filled with textured signs, training tables, soft lights, and people learning how to speak with their hands. Nurses practiced with police officers. Shelter workers sat beside teachers. Parents cried quietly when instructors showed them new ways to reach children they had been loving in silence for years. Ria did not want to stand on the stage. She told Dante this 12 times. Viola called her a coward in tactile sign and then patted her cheek like a queen granting mercy. So Ria stood there in a simple blue dress, her scar aching beneath the fabric, her hands trembling as she looked out at the crowd. Dante spoke first. He stood at the microphone, black suit sharp, face calm, the old danger still around him but no longer the only thing people saw. Viola stood beside him with one hand in Ria's and one hand in Dante's. The whole city seemed to be watching. Reporters, doctors, dock workers, families. Men who feared Dante, people who loved Viola, strangers who had come because they wanted to learn. "I used to think protection meant control," Dante said, his voice carrying through the room. "I thought love meant building walls high enough that pain could not get in. I was wrong. Walls kept my sister safe from some things. They also kept her alone." Ria felt Viola's fingers tighten. Dante turned slightly, looking at Ria. Then Ria Calder walked into our lives with quiet hands, and more courage than any soldier I have ever known. She taught my household that love is not just standing guard outside someone's door. Love is learning how to enter their world with respect. Love is being humble enough to start over. Love is listening, even when listening has nothing to do with sound. The room was silent now. Dante stepped away from the microphone and faced Ria fully. For once, he did not look like a man commanding a room. He looked like a man offering his unguarded heart in front of one. "Ria," he said softly, though the microphone still caught every word, "I asked you to stay once for my sister. Today I am asking you to stay for me. Not as an employee, not as someone I can hide behind a title, as my partner. In this work, in this family, in my life." Ria could not breathe. She thought of the laundromat with its broken sign and tired dryers. She thought of nights spent being invisible. She thought of every person who had looked at her body and missed her heart. She thought of Viola's first tears when someone finally answered. She thought of Dante's hands, once made only for command, learning gentleness one clumsy sign at a time. Then Viola took Ria's hand between both of hers. "Family," she signed. One word, clear, certain, complete. Ria's tears fell before she could stop them. She looked at Viola, then at Dante, and for once in her life, she did not feel too large, too plain, too quiet, or too easy to forget. She felt rooted, seen, chosen. "Yes," she whispered. Dante's face changed with relief so deep, it almost hurt to witness. He stepped forward and took her hands carefully, like he had on the first morning he learned to speak to his sister. He did not kiss her like a man claiming a prize. He kissed her like a man coming home after years in the cold. Soft at first, then deeper, full of everything he had never known how to say. The crowd faded. The cameras faded. The past faded. Viola kept one hand on theirs and smiled. In the months that followed, people told the story many different ways. Some said Ria Calder had tamed Dante Varro. Others said she had saved Viola. Some said she had turned a criminal fortune into a bridge for the forgotten. The truth was quieter and stronger than all of that. Ria had not tamed anyone. She had not rescued a helpless woman. She had simply done what she had always done. She noticed what others ignored. She listened where others assumed there was silence. She reached out her hand when the rest of the room was too afraid, too proud, or too blind to understand. And because she did, a lonely woman found her voice again. A feared man learned that power was not the same as love. A city began to change the way it touched its most unheard people. And Ria Calder, once overlooked beneath the tired lights of a dockside laundromat, became the heart of a family no enemy could break. Because the deepest kind of love was never the loudest. It was not always spoken in grand promises or shouted across crowded rooms. Sometimes it was 2 taps on the wrist, 1 pull toward the heart, and a hand waiting in the dark to say, "Come to me, I am here, and you are not alone." The last promise Salvatore Greco ever asked of Nico Belladonna was not written in blood, but it felt heavier than any blood oath Nico had ever made. Outside the private hospital room, Chicago slept beneath a hard winter rain, the kind that turned streetlights into blurred halos and made the city look like it was quietly drowning. Inside, the machines beside Salvatore's bed breathed for him in soft, tired rhythms, while the most feared man on the south side stood at the foot of the mattress with murder still drying on his hands. Nico Belladonna had come expecting names. He had come expecting revenge. He had come ready to burn half the city if his oldest friend pointed one weak finger toward the men who had tried to kill him. But Salvatore did not ask for bullets. He did not ask for fire. He asked Nico to marry a woman Nico had never met. For a long moment, Nico said nothing. He only stared at the dying man in the narrow hospital bed, trying to decide whether the poison in Salvatore's body had finally reached his mind. Salvatore Greco had been many things in his life. A street soldier, a fixer, a ghost in a tailored coat. A man who could sit across from killers and make them speak like priests in confession. But above everything, he had been Nico's brother in every way that mattered. He had pulled Nico from the wreckage of his father's war. He had taught him which men could be bought, which men had to be broken, and which men should never be trusted even while they were smiling. Without Salvatore, there would be no Belladonna Empire, no Iron Saint, no ruler sitting at the center of Chicago's darkest table. So when Salvatore's cracked lips formed the name Mara Voss, Nico listened, even as anger crawled like heat under his skin. "She is innocent," Salvatore whispered, his voice thin and rough. "And they will not care." Nico's jaw tightened. He hated weakness. He hated begging. He hated the sight of Salvatore, once impossible to scare, looking small beneath white sheets and clear tubes. "Who is she?" "My foster sister," Salvatore said. His eyes fluttered, then forced themselves open again. "Estranged, quiet, smarter than any man in your counting rooms. She works with insurance ledgers, medical claims, fraud patterns. She has nothing to do with us, and now they will drag her into it." Nico stepped closer. The rain tapped against the dark hospital window like fingers asking to be let in. "Who will?" Salvatore tried to laugh, but it turned into a wet cough that made the monitors shiver. "Everyone." That was when Nico understood there was more in the room than death. There was a secret. Salvatore's secrets were never small. They were buried things with teeth. With shaking hands, Salvatore told him about money that had vanished from the Belladonna network. Millions moved through clean-looking charities, clinics, vendor accounts, and construction shells. Someone had stolen from Nico and painted the crime to look like Vivaldi work. A spark thrown into dry grass after years of cold peace between two old families. But the worst part was not the theft. The worst part was the name, stitched into the false trail like a thread meant to strangle her. Mara Voss. Her employment records, her old tax forms, her signature copied from medical insurance files, her name pressed into invoices she had never seen. Once Salvatore died, anyone searching for the stolen money would find her. Nico's enemies would think she was hiding it. Nico's own men would wonder if Salvatore had used her to move it. The Vivaldis would hunt her. The traitor inside Nico's house would silence her. And Mara, quiet Mara in her worn shoes and lonely apartment, would not even understand why death had chosen her door. "Protect her," Salvatore breathed. "Not with guards, not with money, with your name." Nico's face hardened. "No." Salvatore turned his head slowly, and even dying, there was something sharp in his eyes. "You owe me." The words hit harder than any insult could have. Nico Belladonna did not like debt. He paid every debt in full, whether in cash, loyalty, or violence. It was why the streets called him the Iron Saint. Not because he was holy, but because when he gave his word, it became a law even he would not break. Salvatore knew that. He had chosen the one chain Nico could not cut. "Marriage is not protection," Nico said coldly. "It is a cage." "In your world," Salvatore whispered, "a wife is untouchable, unless a man wants war. Make her your wife, Nico. Even if you never love her, even if she hates you for it, let her live." Nico looked away, his dark eyes fixed on the rain-streaked glass. Love had ruined better men than him. Marriage, to him, was a contract, a strategy, a knife hidden inside silk. He had never imagined giving his name to a stranger, especially one tied to a fraud that could split his empire open from the inside. But behind him, Salvatore's breathing grew weaker, and Nico felt the past rising like smoke. A hungry boy on broken pavement, a hand pulling him up. Salvatore's voice saying, "Not yet, little brother, not yet." So Nico turned back. "You have my word," he said. Salvatore's mouth softened with relief. He looked almost young for half a second. Then the machines beside him began to scream. Mara Voss learned of her foster brother's death through a voicemail from a lawyer she did not know. She listened to it 3 times while sitting at her kitchen table in the dim yellow light of her apartment, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold. The heater under the window knocked and hissed like it was fighting to stay alive. Outside, traffic moved through the wet street in tired waves. Mara did not cry at first. She had not seen Salvatore in years. Their childhood had been made of temporary rooms, borrowed kindness, and adults who promised stability while packing boxes. Salvatore had run toward danger as soon as he was old enough to choose it. Mara had run the other way, into numbers, records, small paychecks, quiet routines, and an invisible life where nobody expected anything from her. She had built that invisibility carefully. At work, she wore oversized sweaters, soft black pants, and the same worn flats every day. She kept her dark hair twisted low at her neck, and her voice gentle enough that people forgot she was in the room. At 31, she was good at being overlooked. Some women were taught to shine. Mara had been taught to take up as little space as possible, though her body had never allowed her to disappear the way she wanted. She was fat, with soft arms, full hips, and a round face that strangers judged before she spoke. In offices, people assumed she was harmless. In stores, they assumed she was lazy. Men looked through her unless they wanted to make a joke. Mara had stopped being surprised by cruelty. Surprise required hope, and hope was expensive. Still, Salvatore's death left a strange, hollow place in her chest. He had not been a good brother, not in the ordinary sense. He had missed birthdays, ignored messages, vanished for years, then appeared with gifts too costly to explain. But when they were children, he had once stood between her and a foster father who liked to yell too close to her face. He had taken the slap meant for her and smiled with blood on his lip. That memory had stayed, even after every other bond between them had gone thin. The funeral was held 2 days later, beneath a sky the color of old steel. Mara stood near the back of the cemetery, in a plain navy dress that pulled across her stomach, and a black coat that had lost 1 button. Around the grave, men in dark suits gathered like a wall of shadows. They did not speak loudly. They did not need to. Their silence had weight. Expensive cars lined the narrow cemetery road. Women in black veils dabbed dry eyes with lace handkerchiefs. A priest murmured prayers that vanished into the cold. Then Mara saw him. Nico Belladonna stood at the head of the grave without an umbrella, rain darkening his black overcoat and shining in his hair. He was tall, still, and severe, with a face carved into hard lines by power and old violence. The men around him kept a careful distance, not out of respect alone, but fear. Mara knew his name. Everyone in South Chicago knew his name, even people who pretended not to. The Iron Saint, the man who never broke a promise, the man who never forgave betrayal. Seeing him in person felt like watching a storm choose human shape. When the service ended, Mara tried to leave before anyone noticed her. She was almost at the cemetery gate when a black car rolled slowly beside the curb. The back door opened. A man with silver hair and a flat expression stepped out. "Miss Voss," he said. "Mr. Belladonna would like a word." Her stomach tightened. "I don't know Mr. Belladonna." "That is why he would like a word." Mara looked past him and saw Nico standing near the line of cars, watching her with no warmth at all. His gaze moved over her cracked laptop bag, her damp coat, her sensible shoes, her nervous hands. He did not sneer. That might have been easier. Instead, his disappointment was quiet and immediate, like she had failed a test she never agreed to take. She walked to him because every path away seemed blocked. "Mara Voss," he said. His voice was calm, deep, and empty of comfort. "Yes. Salvatore asked me to protect you." Her throat tightened at the sound of Salvatore's name. I don't need protection. Nico's eyes flickered, not with amusement, but impatience. You do. You don't know me. No, he said, I don't. There was no kindness in his honesty. He looked at her as if she were a problem left behind by a dead man, an obligation wrapped in cheap wool. Mara felt the old shame rise, hot and familiar, but she held his gaze. She had spent her life being underestimated by people with cleaner shoes and louder voices. Nico Belladonna was more dangerous than all of them, but the look was the same. What exactly did he ask you to do? She said. Nico was silent for one breath too long. Then he said, marry you. Mara almost laughed because the words made no sense. They were too absurd, too cold, too violent in their simplicity. But Nico did not smile. The silver-haired man behind him did not blink. The rain kept falling. Somewhere in the cemetery, a woman sobbed softly into a veil. No, Mara said. Nico's expression did not change. That was my answer too. Good. Then we agree. For now. She stepped back. I don't know what kind of game this is, but I'm not part of your world, Mr. Belladonna. I work for an insurance company. I review billing irregularities. I go home. I feed my neighbor's cat when she works late. That is my life. Whatever Salvatore did, whatever you think I know, I don't know it. I believe you, Nico said. The words should have comforted her. They did not. Then leave me alone. His eyes sharpened. Belief will not stop men from taking you. Mara turned away before he could say more. Her hands were shaking by the time she reached the sidewalk outside the cemetery gates. She told herself it was grief. She told herself it was cold. She told herself that Nico Belladonna would forget her by morning because men like him did not waste time on women like her. That lie lasted until the night after Salvatore's burial. Mara was 3 steps from her apartment building when a van without plates slid from the alley and stopped beside her. The side door opened with a soft metallic scrape. She felt it before she understood it, that sudden change in the air when danger stops hiding. A hand clamped around her arm. Another covered her mouth. She tried to scream, but the sound died against leather. The men moved fast, too fast for ordinary thieves. One wore a green scarf tucked beneath his jacket, the old Vivaldi color, a detail Mara noticed with the strange calm of terror. Then headlights exploded across the street. A black SUV mounted the curb and struck the van's front bumper hard enough to twist metal. Men shouted. The hand over Mara's mouth vanished. She stumbled back, gasping, as Nico's people poured from the vehicle like shadows with guns. The fight was short, horribly short. No dramatic warnings. No movie speeches. Just sharp movement, muffled impact, and the wet slap of bodies hitting pavement. By the time Nico arrived, Mara was sitting on the curb in the rain, one shoe missing, her coat torn at the sleeve. He crouched in front of her, his dark coat brushing the dirty water near her feet. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were not as cold as before. Did they hurt you? Mara stared at him, breathing too fast. They knew my name. Yes. They said I had something. Yes. I don't. I know. Her voice broke then, not loudly, but enough to shame her. Why is this happening? Nico looked toward the ruined van, then back at her. Because dead men leave shadows. The wedding happened before the week was over. It was not romantic. There were no flowers except 2 white arrangements that looked more like funeral pieces. There was no music, no laughter, no soft exchange of promises. Mara wore a cream dress, chosen by someone else, a dress that fit her body well, but made her feel like a stranger in her own skin. Nico wore black. His mouth was a hard line through the entire ceremony. The priest spoke quietly in a private chapel attached to the Belladonna estate, while 4 armed men stood near the doors. When Nico slid the ring onto Mara's finger, his hand was warm, steady, and impersonal. When she became Mara Vos Belladonna, nobody clapped. At the mansion, everything was beautiful, and locked. The room given to her had silk sheets, tall windows, soft rugs, and a view of the winter garden where bare trees scratched at the grey sky. There were clothes in the wardrobe that she had not chosen, shoes lined up in perfect rows, creams and perfumes on the vanity, all expensive, all thoughtful, in the way a cage could be thoughtful if someone polished the bars. Mara stood in the center of it, and felt smaller than she had in her old apartment, with the noisy heater and chipped mugs. Nico gave her safety, but he did not give her warmth. He was polite in the way strangers are polite in elevators. He asked if she needed anything, then left before she answered. At dinner, his aunt looked Mara up and down and asked if the dressmaker had been given enough fabric. A few men at the far end of the table lowered their eyes to hide smiles. A woman with red lips and perfect cheekbones, introduced only as Valentina, watched Mara like she was a stain someone had failed to clean. Nico heard it. Mara knew he heard it. He did nothing. That was the moment Mara stopped hoping the marriage might contain even a small kindness. She folded her hands in her lap, swallowed the old hurt, and listened. Listening had always saved her. People revealed themselves when they thought you were too meek to matter. She noticed which men stopped talking when she entered a room. She noticed which captain never said Salvatore's name. She noticed how often Rafe Mancini leaned close to Nico and how quickly others stepped aside for him. Rafe was handsome in a polished, easy way, with warm eyes that did not reach the rest of his face. Everyone seemed to trust him. That alone made Mara careful. Days passed in quiet humiliation. Nico kept her away from his offices. His men treated her like furniture with a wedding ring. The staff spoke around her, not to her. Mara let them. She walked softly through the mansion, reading faces, hearing fragments, memorizing numbers when doors were left open and papers were turned face down too late. They thought she was hiding in her room when she spent hours with her cracked old laptop, reviewing the strange rhythm of this house, like it was one more fraudulent claim file, waiting to be understood. The first time Nico looked at her differently was at the charity casino night. He brought her because tradition demanded it. A belladonna wife had to be seen, even an unwanted one. The private club glowed with gold light, dark wood, and the soft clatter of chips moving across green felt. Women glittered in silk. Men laughed with mouths full of secrets. Mara wore a simple deep blue dress and stood beside Nico, while people pretended not to stare at the size of her arms, the curve of her stomach, the plainness of her face beside all that sharp beauty. The insults came wrapped in sugar. How brave of you to wear that shade. Nico must enjoy charity in all forms. Some women are chosen for loyalty, not looks. Mara heard every word. So did Nico. His jaw tightened once, but still he said nothing. Maybe he was deciding whether she was worth defending. Maybe he was wondering if silence would make her disappear faster. Then a woman near the auction table laughed too loudly and made a comment about Mara not understanding high-value donations. Mara looked at the receipt in the woman's hand, then at the donor list glowing on the tablet beside the champagne tower. 3 numbers did not match. The woman's husband, a minor but ambitious associate named Carlo, had routed a charity bid through a vendor account with a delayed refund clause. It was clever, not clever enough. Mara picked up the tablet. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft enough that the room had to quiet itself to hear her. Carlo's donation was never meant to clear, she said. The receipt number ends in 84, but the donor ledger has it attached to a temporary holding account. By Monday, the payment would reverse into a catering vendor that does not exist. The charity would thank him for money it never received, and he would claim the tax benefit anyway. The room went still. Carlo's face emptied of color. His wife stopped smiling. Nico turned his head slowly and looked at Mara as if a locked door had opened where he had expected a wall. Mara set the tablet down with care. "I review irregular billing for a living," she said. People who steal from good causes usually make the same mistake. They assume nobody quiet is paying attention. No one insulted her again that night. When they returned to the mansion, Nico walked beside her through the long front hall without speaking. Mara did not ask what he was thinking. She was tired of wanting approval from people who offered it only after being shocked into respect. At her bedroom door, he finally stopped. "You saw that in 3 minutes," he said. Mara looked at him. "I saw it in 1. I used the other 2 to decide whether embarrassing him was worth the trouble." For the first time since she had met him, something almost like a smile touched Nico Belladonna's mouth. It vanished quickly, but Mara saw it. Inside her room, a package waited on the bed. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with plain string, with her name written in Salvatore's slanted handwriting. Mara's breath caught so hard it hurt. She sat slowly on the edge of the mattress and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was an old prayer book with worn corners, a small brass safety deposit key, and a single page covered in numbers that looked, at first glance, like scripture references. But Mara had spent her whole life reading what people tried to hide. Her grief went very quiet. The numbers were not verses. They were transaction codes. And somewhere beyond the locked gates of the Belladonna mansion, Salvatore's last secret had begun to wake. Mara sat on the edge of the silk-covered bed with Salvatore's prayer book open in her lap, and for the first time since she had entered Nico Belladonna's house, the mansion did not feel like a cage. It felt like a crime scene. Every quiet hallway, every polished door, every whispered conversation beyond the walls, suddenly seemed connected to the numbers written in Salvatore's careful hand. The page looked innocent to anyone else. A few short lines, a handful of references, the kind an old woman might mark before Sunday Mass. But Mara saw the rhythm beneath it. She saw the spacing, the repetition, the sequence. Salvatore had not left her comfort. He had left her a map. She did not sleep that night. Long after the house settled into its deep, expensive silence, Mara spread the prayer book, the page, and her laptop across the floor. She entered each number slowly, testing it against dates, payment batches, routing codes, old clinic invoices, and charity ledgers she had glimpsed in Nico's files. By sunrise, her eyes burned and her back ached, but the first door had opened. The scripture numbers matched transaction fragments. The fragments pointed toward a bank branch near the old financial district. The safety deposit key was not symbolic. It was waiting for her. Mara expected Nico to stop her when she asked to leave the estate. He was standing in the breakfast room with a black coffee untouched near his hand, speaking quietly to Rafe Mancini. Rafe looked relaxed, handsome, and loyal, the kind of man who knew exactly how to make trust look effortless. His gaze flicked toward Mara when she entered, then down to the prayer book tucked against her chest. It was fast, barely anything, but Mara saw it. His smile appeared one breath too late. "I need to go to the bank," she said. Nico looked at her, still unreadable. "Why?" "Because Salvatore left me something." Rafe gave a small laugh. Sal was always dramatic. Probably old family papers. Mara looked at him. Probably. Nico studied her face for a long moment. Since the charity casino night, something had shifted in his eyes when he looked at her. Not warmth, not yet, but attention. Real attention. Finally he nodded and sent 2 guards with her. Rafe did not object. That worried her more than if he had. The safety deposit box was small, plain, and cold when the bank manager placed it in front of her. Inside, Mara found a cheap burner phone, a faded photograph of her and Salvatore as children on a cracked apartment stoop, and a velvet pouch filled with old casino chips. For a moment, grief rose so quickly she almost closed the box. Then she noticed one chip was heavier than the others. She turned it over, found the seam, and pressed her thumbnail into the edge until it opened. A micro-storage card slid into her palm like a secret with a heartbeat. Back at the mansion, Mara locked herself in her room and began to decode Salvatore's last confession. The files were broken, damaged, and layered beneath simple protections that would have stopped most people who did not already know what to look for. Mara knew. She had spent years finding lies hidden beneath clean paperwork. False medical clinics, inflated treatment claims. Construction companies paid for jobs never started. Charity accounts created for children who did not exist. The missing money moved through them all in careful pulses, as if someone had wanted the theft to look messy enough to blame on outside enemies but clean enough to survive a shallow review. By the third night, Mara knew two things with a certainty that made her hands go cold. Salvatore had not stolen from Nico. He had been investigating the theft. And the man behind it was not a Vivaldi. It was Rafe Mancini. She stared at his name on the screen until the letters blurred. Rafe had been with Nico since boyhood. Rafe sat beside him at dinner. Rafe placed a hand on Nico's shoulder like a brother. Rafe smiled at Mara, as if she were harmless. All the while, he had been moving millions through fake clinics, using her employment records to give the paper trail a believable center. To Nico's men, she would look like Salvatore's accomplice. To the Vivaldis, she would look like the keeper of their stolen fortune. She had not been brought into the war by accident. She had been built into it. Mara carried the laptop to Nico's office just after midnight. He was alone, his jacket off, sleeves rolled to his forearms, a glass of untouched whiskey near a stack of reports. The room smelled of leather, smoke, and rain. He looked up when she entered, and for once, he did not seem annoyed by her presence. "I know who stole from you," she said. Nico went still. She placed the laptop on his desk and showed him the trail. The clinics, the shell charities, the forged invoices, the pieces of her own life copied and twisted into bait. Nico listened without interrupting. His face did not change, but his silence grew harder with every document she opened. Then she said Rafe's name. The room froze. "No," Nico said. Mara had expected it, and still the word hurt. "The proof is there. Rafe has bled for this family. So did Salvatore." His eyes sharpened. Careful. Mara felt something inside her close, not with anger, but with tired understanding. "That is your problem, Nico. You think betrayal has to arrive wearing an enemy's face. Sometimes it sits beside you, agrees with you, and waits for your pride to do half the work." His jaw tightened. "You have been my wife for less than a month, and Rafe has been lying to you for longer than that." He stood, tall and furious, but Mara did not step back. She had lived too long beneath the weight of other people's disappointment to be crushed by his. Nico looked at her, as if he wanted to believe her and hated himself for it. In the end, he closed the laptop. "I will look into it." "No," Mara said softly. "You will warn him without meaning to. Men like Rafe survive because powerful men refuse to imagine being fooled." Nico's face went colder than winter. "Go to your room." Mara picked up the laptop. Gladly. The storm came the next night. Rain slammed against the mansion windows so hard the glass seemed to tremble. Mara woke to darkness, complete and unnatural. The soft hum of the security system was gone. The hall outside her room was silent. Too silent. She sat up, heart pounding, and reached for the phone beside the bed. No signal. Then came the first gunshot, muffled by distance but unmistakable. The door opened before she could move. Nico stepped inside with a gun in his hand, his face stripped of all ceremony. "Get up," he said. Mara did not argue. She grabbed her shoes, her laptop bag, and the prayer book without knowing why. In the hall, the mansion had become a shadowed maze of shouting, alarms trying and failing to wake, and fast footsteps moving behind walls. Men wearing Vivaldi colors had breached the estate, but Mara saw the lie almost immediately. They moved too cleanly through the blind spots. They knew which corridor had no camera. They knew where Nico would run. They knew the location of the panic room before Nico even turned toward it. "This is not a Vivaldi attack," she whispered. Nico pulled her behind a marble column as bullets cracked through the far windows. "Now is not the time. They know your house." His eyes cut to hers. This time, he heard her. A shot tore into the wall inches above them. Nico shoved her down and returned fire, then pulled her through a service door hidden behind a panel in the library. They descended into an old tunnel that smelled of damp stone and rust. Mara's breath came hard, her thighs burning as she hurried after him through the dark. Behind them, the mansion shook with violence. Ahead, the tunnel narrowed toward a maintenance exit beyond the east gardens. They were almost out when Nico stumbled. At first, Mara thought he had slipped. Then she saw the dark stain spreading beneath his ribs. "You're hit. I can walk." "No, you can bleed while pretending you can walk." He gave her a sharp look, almost offended, but his knees weakened before he could answer. Mara wrapped his arm over her shoulders and nearly buckled under his weight. He was heavy with muscle and blood and stubbornness, but she dug her feet into the wet ground and pulled him forward. Outside, rain fell in sheets. The estate's old maintenance vehicle sat beneath a lean-to near the garden shed. Mara had seen it twice from her window. She had also seen the groundskeeper leave the key under the visor. Nico stared at her as she climbed in and slammed the cracked dashboard with the heel of her palm until the engine coughed awake. "You know how to steal a truck? I review insurance fraud," she said, throwing it into gear. "You learn what people lie about." They drove through flooded back roads with no headlights until the mansion disappeared behind trees and storm. Nico's breathing grew rougher beside her. Once, his hand slid from the wound, and Mara saw too much blood. Fear moved through her then, deep and cold. Not fear of the men behind them. Fear of losing him before she had decided what he was to her. Salvatore's shuttered church stood at the edge of an abandoned block, its windows boarded, its bell tower cracked, its doors swollen from years of weather. Mara found the emergency key where Salvatore's files said it would be, beneath a loose stone near the steps. Inside, the air smelled of dust, wax, and old wood. She helped Nico onto a narrow table in the back room and found the medical supplies hidden behind a false cabinet. Salvatore had prepared for everything except surviving long enough to use them. Mara read from the emergency manual with shaking hands. She cleaned the wound while Nico cursed softly through clenched teeth. She packed it, bandaged it, forced him to drink water, then sat beside him through the long hours before dawn with his gun in her lap and the laptop open on a church pew. Every sound outside made her lift the weapon. Every time Nico's breathing changed, she touched his wrist to make sure he was still alive. When he woke, the storm had softened to a thin gray rain. Mara was sitting near the door, exhausted, blood-streaked, hair falling from its pins, his gun held carefully in both hands. For a long moment, Nico only looked at her. No impatience, no disappointment, no cold duty. "You stayed," he said. Mara did not turn around. "You were bleeding on a church table." It seemed rude to leave. His mouth moved like he almost smiled, but his eyes were darker than that. "I did not deserve it." "No," she said, "you didn't." The honesty settled between them, heavy but clean. Nico pushed himself upright with a quiet sound of pain. "Tell me everything." So she did. This time he listened. Mara showed him the full shape of Rafe's plan, the stolen millions, the false invoices, the Vivaldi bait, the murdered heir whose death had been hidden inside the feud like a match waiting to be struck. Rafe did not want money only. He wanted war. He wanted Nico weakened, angry, and blind. He wanted the families to destroy each other, and when the smoke cleared, he would take what was left. Nico's face changed as he absorbed it, not softer, sharper, humbled in a way that looked painful on him. "I should have believed you," he said. "Yes, I was wrong." "Yes." He looked at her. and there was no defense left in him. "I am sorry, Mara." She wanted the apology to fix more than it did. It did not erase the silence at dinner, the insults he had ignored, the way he had looked at her on the day of Salvatore's funeral, but it mattered that he said it without excuse. Mara turned the laptop toward him. "I can move the money." Nico frowned. "Back to me?" "No, to the Vivaldis." His stare hardened with shock. "That is dangerous. So is letting Rafe keep $38 million to buy your men." Mara explained the plan slowly. Rafe had built the false invoice network to frame her. She could use the same structure to reverse the trap. If the money landed in accounts the Vivaldis controlled, along with proof that Rafe had framed them and killed one of their own, the hunt for Mara would end. Rafe would lose his war chest. Nico would be forced into a temporary peace with people he hated. It was humiliating, risky, and the only move bold enough to work. Nico looked at her, as if the woman in front of him had replaced the unwanted wife he thought he had married. "You think like a general." "No," Mara said. "I think like someone who has spent her life cleaning up messes powerful people were too arrogant to understand." This time, Nico did smile. It was small, tired, and real. "Do it." For the next 6 hours, the church became a battlefield made of numbers. Mara worked from a cracked pew, while Nico made calls on a secure phone Salvatore had hidden beneath the altar. Rain whispered across the roof. The old stained glass glowed faintly with mourning. Mara used the false invoices, the fake medical vendors, the shell clinics, and Rafe's own laundering path to pull the money from his control. Every transfer had to look like a correction. Every correction had to carry evidence. She attached recordings, documents, payment strings, and the clean proof of the murdered Vivaldi heir. At dawn, $38 million moved. By 7, the Vivaldi boss called. By noon, the hit on Mara was withdrawn. By sunset, both families agreed to meet. The abandoned train station had once carried bootleg liquor, bribed politicians, stolen cash, and dead men's secrets beneath its rusted roof. Now it held 2 syndicates facing each other across cracked tile and old tracks silvered with rain. Nico arrived pale but standing, a dark coat hiding the bandage at his side. His men expected Mara to remain in the car. Nico held out his hand instead. She looked at it, then at him. "This does not mean I forgive you," she said. "I know." She took his hand anyway. When they entered together, the whispers moved faster than the cold air. Rafe stood near the center of the station, dressed perfectly, smiling like a man who believed every outcome had already been purchased. His smile faded when he saw Mara at Nico's side. The Vivaldis waited across from them, old men and young killers with grief in their eyes and suspicion in their hands. Nico did not speak first. Mara did. Her voice was quiet, but the station carried it. She laid out the money trail, the clinics, the charities, the construction shells, the forged invoices, the staged attack, and the murder that had been used to poison one family against another. She did not perform. She did not shout. She simply revealed the truth one clean piece at a time, until the room had nowhere to hide from it. Documents passed from hand to hand, phones lit with confirmations, men who had laughed at her sighs, her plainness, her silence, now watched her as if she were a blade they had mistaken for paper. Rafe tried to laugh. Then he tried to deny. Then, when denial failed, he turned ugly. "She is a fat little office rat," he snapped, his mask finally cracking. "You are all standing here listening to a nobody who should have stayed behind a desk where she belonged." Nico moved. Mara felt it before he took the first step, the old violence rising in him like flame. But then he stopped. Not because Rafe deserved mercy, because Mara was not finished. She opened the final file. Rafe's own voice filled the station, recorded in a call Salvatore had captured before the assassination attempt. Rafe laughing. Rafe naming the Vivaldi air. Rafe explaining how easy it would be to make Nico angry enough to start a war. When the recording ended, there was no sound except rain dripping through a broken part of the roof. Nico stepped forward then. He did not rage. He did not give Rafe the dignity of a long speech. He stripped him of rank, protection, and name in a voice so cold it seemed to drain the warmth from the room. Rafe reached for his gun. He never cleared leather. The shot echoed through the station once. Rafe fell where old tracks crossed beneath his polished shoes. No one moved. Nico turned, not to his captains, not to the Vivaldis, but to Mara. He walked back to her slowly, and in front of allies, enemies, doubters, and men who once whispered that she was an embarrassment, he lowered his head. "My wife saved this family," he said. "Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me. Anyone who threatens her threatens Belladonna blood. She is not my burden. She is not my charity. She is not temporary. Mara vos Belladonna is the reason this empire is still standing." Mara held his gaze. Her throat tightened, but she did not cry. She had cried enough in rooms where nobody cared. This time, she stood tall in the body the world had mocked, wearing the name that had once felt like a cage, and now felt like a weapon she had chosen to hold. After Rafe's death, Chicago changed quietly. Wars did not always end with cheering. Sometimes they ended with old men signing papers in locked rooms, and young men deciding not to die for a lie. The Vivaldis took back their dead heir's honor and their stolen money. Nico kept his throne, though everyone knew it had been Mara who found the crack beneath it. The Belladonna men came to her now with problems they could not solve. Missing funds, strange vendors, captains living beyond their declared income. Mara listened, reviewed, and exposed rot with the calm patience of a woman who had been ignored long enough to become dangerous. The household changed too. Nico's aunt no longer commented on Mara's body. Valentina vanished from the dinner table. Staff who once spoke around her began asking what she preferred. Men lowered their eyes when she entered a room, not because she demanded fear, but because truth in her hands had proven more frightening than any gun. Yet Mara's greatest victory was not fear. It was remaining herself. She did not become thinner to deserve respect. She did not trade her soft sweaters for armor every day. She did not sharpen her voice until it sounded like Nico's world. Some mornings, she still sat alone with tea before the house woke. Some nights, she fed the old garden cat that had wandered through the gates and refused to leave. She remained quiet, observant, soft in places people had called weakness, and unbreakable in places they had never thought to test. Nico changed more slowly. Men like him did not become gentle overnight. He was still dangerous, still feared, still capable of ending a life without trembling when his world required it. But with Mara, he learned the harder discipline of patience. He apologized not once, but many times, in words and in actions. He dismissed men who insulted her. He brought her into meetings before anyone asked. He waited when she needed silence. He did not touch her like property. He learned to ask. Forgiveness came slowly, the way winter leaves a city, not all at once, not because he deserved it, because he earned small pieces of it and held them carefully. One evening, months after the train station, Mara found Nico in the old library, standing before Salvatore's photograph with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked tired in the soft lamplight, not weak, just human. He knew, Nico said, without turning. Sal knew what you were. Mara stepped beside him. No, he knew what I could survive. Nico looked at her then, and the hunger in his eyes was no longer only possession. It was respect, gratitude, something warmer and more dangerous, because it asked for more than obedience. I was ashamed of you, he said quietly. Not because of who you were, because you did not fit the picture of power I trusted. That was my blindness, not your lack. Mara studied him for a long moment. I know. I will spend the rest of my life regretting it. No, she said. Spend it doing better. He nodded once. I can do that. Outside, Chicago glittered beyond the windows, cold and alive, a city of secrets moving beneath yellow lights. Mara stood beside the man she had married to survive, and realized survival was no longer the whole story. The marriage that began as a dying man's demand had become something neither of them had expected. Not soft, not simple, not innocent, but real. By the end of that winter, no one called Mara Vos Belladonna the unwanted wife. No one called her harmless. No one wondered why Nico had married her. They knew. Every captain, every rival, every polished liar who entered the Belladonna world learned the same lesson. Mara had uncovered a coup, ended a Mafia war, saved Nico's life, and rebuilt the bones of an empire that had nearly rotted from within. She had not done it by shrinking. She had not done it by becoming someone else. She had done it by watching, listening, thinking, and refusing to disappear when powerful men expected her to. And when she walked into the Belladonna Club months later, wearing comfortable black flats, a deep green dress, and no apology at all, the room fell into respectful silence. Nico rose from the head table as she approached, not because old law demanded it, not because men were watching, but because she was his wife, his equal, and the quiet force that had saved everything he thought he controlled. Mara took her seat beside him, not behind him. Beside him. And in the city that had once overlooked her, everyone finally understood that the Iron Saints' empire had not been saved by fear, violence, or blood. It had been saved by the woman nobody thought was worth seeing.